Welcome back, everybody, to the Land Conservation and Development Commission, Day 2. We just had a great tour of the city of Lebanon and a roundtable discussion with local officials. A lot of great discussion about housing and infrastructure and wetlands. Now we're going to go to agenda item, is this 6? Agenda item 6, conversation with staff. I'd like to welcome them.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, this is Brenda Bateman, Director of Department of Land Conservation and Development. And this afternoon, we have as a guest with us virtually, the Governor's Policy Advisor for Climate and Energy, Karin Power. She is one of several policy advisors in the Governor's office that is responsible for DLCD's portfolio. As you know, we're a natural resource agency, but now increasingly also a housing agency and an economic development agency. So we have several policy advisors that we coordinate with on a daily basis. And but first and foremost, we have Karin Power, who's agreed to join us today and has told the agency's boards and commissions that she would like some time with each of us to get to know our commissioners, to talk a little bit about herself, her background, and maybe some of the priorities and policies that she's responsible for on behalf of Governor Kotek. So welcome, Karin.
Thanks, Director Bateman. Nice to see you all. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Super. And thanks for your flexibility too. I was originally scheduled to be on deck to meet with you in person yesterday, but I ended up covering for one of my colleagues at another conference commitment, so I had to shift my schedule around. So thanks for your flexibility. Both Jeff Huntington, the governor's senior natural resource advisor, and I had wanted to just come by and say hello in 2024. I went on the walking tour with some of you in Salem last year, but wanted to come back as the governor's entering, I guess we're rapidly approaching halfway through her second year in office, and share some of our work. Your team and I have been working exceptionally closely together, and a lot of things that don't come squarely before LCDC and more before OPAC and other coastal efforts. So I know that I had a chance to meet with some of you already, but for those of you who might be new faces, especially in the audience, I'm Karin Power, the Natural Resources and Climate Advisor to the Governor. I'm now one of 3 folks in our natural resource, energy, climate portfolio for the governor. Chandra Ferrari recently joined us on a rotation from ODFW, and it's really wonderful to have her water and habitat policy expertise, particularly as we're looking at natural working lands investment and blue carbon and other efforts. But predominantly, my portfolio has been working with DLCD and excellent staff on offshore wind potential for renewable energy potential, thinking big picture around some of the federal efforts around transmission siting, sort of what we see ahead as the grid demand continues to grow as we decarbonize the sector. And as a thematic overlay, we're really, as our team, thinking about how we build more resilient communities around the state, and part and parcel of this work. So ODO continues to play a strong role in that with their incentive programs that the legislature has tasked them with implementing, particularly community renewables, those that help provide a little bit more of a resilient hub in communities in the event of power outages or other events. And I've been delighted to be working more closely with DLCD's coastal staff as we're looking at future potential renewable energy developments along the coast in the coming decade, and how those may play a role in our overall grid reliability and security. But I'd be curious, I know Director Bateman and her staff have about 5 policy advisors in our office that they work with. Sometimes we're together and sometimes we're separate. But if any of these topic areas are of particular interest to you, first and foremost, we're just really grateful for your service. And other similar boards and commissions are thinking about how resiliency plays a role in sustainability for the state. For example, the State Sustainability Board was sort of on hold for a few months while they were fully reappointed. They met for the first time in a couple of months just this month and are thinking ahead to enterprise scale sustainability efforts. And the Climate Action Commission is also in the process of meeting its new appointments, sort of an externally focused board and thinking about big picture, how is our state doing? And they're particularly focused on natural and working lands investments after being given some money last session to help prioritize that work across the state, especially in our rural and frontier areas. But I hope you've had a terrific visit to Lebanon, and would love to just visit with you for a bit and hear any priorities that you have and work maybe where we can collaborate on.
Thank you, Chair Warren. Thank you for the invitation to speak to you on this, because being from the coastal area and thinking about how do we have one Oregon that encompasses rural and urban, that bridges insofar as possible the wealth gap, that addresses insofar as possible the healing of the planet, and addresses insofar as possible the suffering of the people. All of that I heard in our discussion today with the elected local leaders. What they're talking about is wanting very much to take all of those sets of circumstances into account and needing support to be able to do that. You probably heard countless times the need to have supplemental administrative infrastructure. You've probably heard countless times the need to ease the administrative burden by integrating at this state level the kinds of data that are input and the way those data are used so that it can happen one time. And we're talking healthcare systems, we're talking every kind of interaction between local entities and the state and the feds to make that administrative burden easier, to increase the efficiency and effectiveness of committed local and state leaders as we address the needs of the people and the planet. So looking forward to partnering with you in that regard in every way possible. Thank you.
Likewise, thank you.
Commissioners?
I just wanted to thank Karen for her work and her attention to detail, willingness to roll up her sleeves and really get into the heart of some of our technical program issues with our staff. I know she speaks very highly in particular of our coastal staff and our renewable energy and solar folks that are all in the middle of rulemaking and community discussions right now. But I just wanted to make sure that you knew she is also right there in the room on behalf of the executive branch and also with a protective wing around us and our staff as we're out and about. She's been very energetic and is really inspirational in terms of her listening and her care for our Oregon communities and also our Oregon agency staff. So I wanted to thank you for that and let you know that has not gone unnoticed.
Well, it's a pleasure working with them. I learned so much. You really have top-notch caliber staff who go above and beyond to serve communities all over the state. And I think they do an exceptional job of holding multiple perspectives in the work they do. and really actively listening to folks who really disagree with each other and trying to find that space in between where you can create, progress forward. It's not easy. They do it really, really well. And I know they lift each other up in that process. So thanks for mentioning. Yes, sometimes I do invite myself along so I can help support them in that work, but also it's just a really great opportunity to work alongside your agency and our other natural resource agencies as we collaborate on these challenging issues before us that will grow, with the challenges of our time. So thanks for letting me pop in. I know I think you're after lunch and you've just been around on a whirlwind tour, so I don't need to take up more of your time, but I do hope to come back and visit again in person.
We would love that. Thank you. Sure.
Thank you very much for joining us today. We're going to move on to our next agenda item. We'll now have agenda item 11, commission business with support from Director Brenda Bateman. This is an informational item where public comment will be accepted. Director.
Thank you, Chair. Again, Brenda Bateman, Director of the Department. So we took care of some business yesterday. And you heard our financial report, and there was a bit of an action item there with regard to delegation of approvals for my time, expenses, and travel. What remains in the commission business today are a couple of items. One, I just wanted to actually, before we go into business, this is the time that the commissioners go around in their roundtable. I think it would be a great opportunity to reflect, if you're willing to, on the tour that we had this morning and the roundtable that we just had with local officials interested in any observations or perspectives that you may have coming out of that. And then we can get to the business part a bit later. But usually for our newer commissioners, this is a time when we take a few minutes to talk about some things that you've each either seen in your geographic region that pertain to LCDC business, or I know a number of you have some ancillary duties. And so you've been working closely with our staff on some technical work groups or rules advisory committees. So either geographically or issue-wise, if you have some observations to make there as well, that would be very welcome.
Who wants to start us off? Commissioner Boyer.
So today's tour, I think Director Bateman and I were talking about some of our favorite parts of Main Street. It's always the second floors. So today's tour, it was mind blowing. It's beautiful up there, and I love the preservation that's happening on the ground floor, retail space, plus the livability of the communities really struck me, because in the community I live in, all the apartments have been taken for hotels. So there's really no living downtown anymore. And just walking Lebanon today made me realize how much I miss that. So, and I love that they're preserving it. Because it makes more of a vibrant downtown when you live down there. So that spoke to me today. The other part was touring the partnership of the farm worker housing and the community there that was built. It's beautiful. I would live there if I was here. Oh, it's that pretty. And working with Department of Agriculture as closely as I do, the H2A housing that I deal with a lot. So it was really interesting to see a different type of housing for the farm worker today. Had not had that on my radar before. So I really appreciated seeing that today. And so that's my reflection. And I've just been really engulfed in this RAC process with the department and working closely with Hillary. So that came to light yesterday. So I don't think I need to report much on that, because I'll probably be reporting on it a lot more in the future. So thank you.
Mr. Lazo.
Thank you, Chair Warren. Let's see, with 3 different subjects. So let me first reflect on the tour today. I think the tour, I love the tours that we do when we're on the road. We learn both the tour and then the roundtables. You just learn so much about the places that we get to go to. And I'm grateful for that opportunity to learn. But I was struck by some of the starkness on the tour today, and I'm grateful and appreciative of Director Bateman and Patrick, the way they set up the stop at Colonia Paz, and its contrast to what we experienced touring the mayor's residence to be in downtown Lebanon. Important work, really amazing. But it's one residence compared to the 184 that we experienced at Colonia Paz for a specific community. So really two very different experiences. And what I appreciated about the tour today at Colonia Paz is I don't know if it had already been set up to talk to the FHDC folks or not, but I gave some feedback about as we do these tours, really making sure that we have a perspective around communities that are impacted by the things that we are touring around. I think if we hadn't had the experience of hearing from FHDC today, we would not have gotten that very specific story. And I was aware of it, as I said today, because I actually had talked to FHDC when they were trying to develop that property about the fair housing issues they were experiencing coming into the community. And it played out very much the way that they had talked about it today. And really was called in, not, as the city said, they followed their process very, very well. We're very well trained on how to ignore these, not ignore, but how not to make their decision based on the comments they will receive. Yet those comments were very widespread in the community. They were made very public. And it was very difficult for the FHDC community to be hearing and experiencing what they were trying to bring that housing here to serve their community. And as you heard, it was the first time that they had needed to go out and bring a land use attorney in to get a development through. That's how concerned they were about what they had been hearing. So it was fantastic to be there today to see the development, to experience the murals, and hear the kind of programming that is there. And I know that's the work that FHDC does. It's really remarkable to hear that. I was super grateful to the folks today that at the round table to really dive deep into this infrastructure question. It really had been bothering me as we were going through this housing discussion and hearing over and over about infrastructure. I kept thinking, I think there's two different buckets that we're really talking about here. To have that confirmation was super powerful, and for us to watch that as we move forward to say, okay, let's make sure we're talking about we're hearing the right thing here. You're talking about the infrastructure that runs up to your development, the Greenfield, that's different necessarily than this capacity infrastructure down at the wastewater treatment plant or the water treatment plant. And I think there's two different funding solutions to that. Solutions is a tough word to use for that. I'm not sure there's a solution on either side of it, but there are two different solutions. And so we need to have some really specific conversations about how we solve that. Things I didn't say in that meeting that I thought was, I think the hard part is that residents might be able to make the case that say, well, you know what? We wouldn't have a wastewater capacity issue if we didn't expand. We weren't growing. So it's a reason we shouldn't grow. It's a reason we shouldn't build new houses. We literally don't have capacity. That's not the answer that we can have right now. And so we've got to figure out how to not only solve getting the pipe to the new development, but how to solve the capacity issue in a city that really needs experiencing growth. So it's a really amazing conversation. Local perspectives that we get is just invaluable. So, and then directly from folks who are the public works directors, can't get any closer to the folks that are experiencing some real impacts. So I rambled there a little bit because I will also am heavily involved, as you know, in the housing rulemaking, and that's actually on the agenda today. So I'm going to save all of that for that agenda item and what's going on there and the work that's being done. But just really exciting work, and the housing team is continuing to knock it out of the ballpark. And so looking forward to that update. And don't shortchange it because it's going to be the end of 2 long days. I think they maybe did save the best for last. I mean, let's put it that way. Huh?
Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Dessert? Are you dessert today? Thank you. Well, I love your conversation, and I want to piggyback on what both of you said, but in reverse order. Well, Commissioner Lazo, it occurs to me that what we're talking about is the reality that has been and the reality we are growing into, and how to bridge those and unify them. It's kind of the opposite of cell meiosis, right? It's the obverse of that, because we are creating an entity, we hope, which is a community, we hope. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. And I want to acknowledge the hard work that you're both doing, because when we look at goal 3 and goal 4, I appreciate that we are saving farmland, that we are attempting to love, in the way I put it, both the farms and the farmers in these complicated, challenging conversations about we're controlling people. We are setting up sidebars and objectives and support to move forward to a community that's evolving to meet current circumstances. And how do we best do that? I'm so humbled and honored to be working with you in that effort. It's a joy. Thank you. For myself and my community, when I read about protecting forest land and protecting its role in the economy, I want to wail. I want to weep. Because here's the chair of the Board of Forestry, a person, as an individual, I have such respect and affection for, saying, well, a majority of Oregonians, as he cast the deciding vote to adopt a habitat conservation plan that we're terrified will devastate our economy. He says a majority of Oregonians don't want to see industrial farming. Industrial forestry. But you see, forestry is long-term farming. And the way it's spoken to us, it sounds as though people say, I don't want to see working forests. I want parkland. And I look at what's happened to the federal forest and the fuel load that's created, the impact of forest fires on the release of carbon that is no longer sequestered in either living trees or forest products, but released into the environment when those forest lands burn. And it breaks my heart, because it is not only an environmental catastrophe, it's an economic catastrophe. In my community, we lose the revenue from the timber sales. We lose the jobs, primary, secondary, tertiary, the money that's released into the community from those jobs. We lose the companies. So what we have, potentially at least, is owning class and serving class with a hollowed out, non-existent middle class. Because the owning class is people who can afford to live there. They come perhaps with trust funds or inherited wealth or pensions. Or they come because they can afford to be there temporarily and visit. They still come as owning class, not as serving class. So how do we reinvent that economy? Because I have people, I have people telling me how great tourism jobs are. I've worked tourism jobs, there may be some good tourism jobs. There's a whole lot of standing on a person's feet and having the boss cut your hours, because that is a business decision that's possible in a tourism industry. There is no adequate or stable income. So I don't know what we do about that, but I have to share my reality with you, because we're in this together, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you.
Commissioner Porter.
I would say that Commissioner Thompson, I wish I would have gone before you, because that's a hard act to follow. So your insights are pretty impressive, and I really appreciate getting to listen to you. So I guess to piggyback on that one before I get to mine, I completely agree with you. And I think in a lot of what we do, as decision makers, be it on this body or on a rack or on a TAC, oftentimes these processes are, we're trying to turn them into more of a democratic process as opposed to a process with the people that actually understand, have worked it, understand what the impacts are, and try to guide around minimizing the adverse impacts. And so I think in a lot of cases, the collective we, have kind of lost sight of that. And hopefully we can kind of get our arms around that again. But regarding, my reflections upon today, I was introduced to the city of Lebanon several months ago when I started doing some work up here, and I have been nothing but impressed when I come up here. It's a neat community. It's a community that it's almost an anomaly for many of the communities that we have today. It's a community that has a can-do attitude. Instead of finding reasons why this won't work or that won't work. It's a community that's built on pride and really is built on friendliness. It does not have a command and control structure, but it encourages its community and its citizens to do the best they can do. And you don't see that very often. And so, for the last, 6 months or so of working up here, I am just wholeheartedly impressed with the culture here. So many other communities, hopefully might learn from this one. One of the from the roundtable, one of the things that really jumped out at me, and it's just something that I have, been having to deal with during this meeting, is when the mayor and some of the staff members said that everything rolls downhill to the smallest entity, and that is true whether it's a small city or whether it's a member of the regulated community, because it all rolls downhill to for the lowest common denominator to implement what we decide. They did make one comment today that also struck me, and they said, I know we can make public comment, but those typically don't seem to be regarded. You hear that a lot, and I think we need to take that to heart. We need to take that very seriously. So again, we need to make sure we've got the correct voices at the table when we make these decisions. So that's it with Lebanon and my reflections from being here. This is a great town. What I've been working on recently, and I know this is my first meeting, so I don't have much to reflect on since the last meeting, but I am the liaison right now for the Target Industry Rural Advisory Committee. And we've had one meeting so far. I think it's the first of 3, and it's been an interesting rack so far. Let's see, how do I start this? I think the first rack meeting, I think what we were doing is kind of more going through kind of just the baseline and getting people up to speed with what the rulemaking committee is tasked with. And some of the questions that I really took note of was with the target industries. Are we looking at just primary industry? Are we looking at supportive? I would have my own opinion of that. I think that we would also need to look at supportive, because you have to kind of support your target industries. Some of the planners that are on that rack were very candid, which was appreciated. They mentioned that during their economic opportunities analysis, that they typically have to look out on a 20-year horizon. And so that the target industries approach is a really good tool. They say typically when they're looking at on that 20-year horizon, that they're typically, 20 years later, they realize that they were probably wrong. And so that the need evolves, and sometimes it's much more rapidly than that 20-year horizon. overwhelmingly, it seems like a lot of mass for flexibility during this rural advisory committee, that they really would like to see some flexibility. I guess we'll see how that continues to play out. Staff was recommending a 3-digit SIC code, and I think there were folks that were hoping that they could pare it down to a 2-digit SIC code, if nothing else, just to provide a little bit of flexibility. Just some things from my geographic region. Some of you are familiar with Roseburg's urban growth boundary swap. That is in its final throes right now. We are removing about 290 acres from the current urban growth boundary border and adding about 220. There isn't any net increase in the 673 dwellings that will be removed versus added to the area. The city efforts over the past 40 years have pointed to this area, which is, they call it the Charter Oaks area, as being the most suitable for expansion. They had a public open house on April 16th, and then they're having a joint city and county public hearing in May. So we're getting really close to having that wrapped up. So that'll be good. And I reached out to all the county commissioners and others within each one of the counties that I'm supposed to be representing. Douglas County has been struggling with urban expansion efforts while trying to balance the conservation and vital ecosystems. And I think we're kind of seeing that everywhere. We heard a lot about that today with the folks here in Lebanon. They feel a lot of pressure to address the housing shortages, possible need to utilize the low value ag lands while trying to preserve the high value ag lands. And I think we're probably seeing that in other places as well. And they would really like to advocate for more of case by case approaches rather than a one size fits all. And I think that's a common theme that we keep hearing as well. We heard that yesterday during the Farm and Forest rulemaking. We heard it today. You know, we hear it kind of overwhelmingly. You know, flexibility. Let's look at the specific, you know, facts to each case. Jackson County, they also communicated several specific issues and that I need to learn more about. They're working to try to balance the city's potential transportation plan change to the climate friendly equitable communities program. How to balance that with the county's comprehensive plan. They're working to try to resolve conflicts between protecting goals 3, 4, and 5 resources and the clear housing shortage that they have while encouraging responsible development. That's kind of another common issue. One that's kind of specific to their, they're trying to work through this Goal 11 sewer connection exception challenge, which I'm relatively unfamiliar with. They're curious why to take farmland out of production to put septic systems in when a certain, you know, tract of land and their neighbors are close to a sewer line. So those are particular issues I think that I'm going to work on and I need to learn more about. If anybody has any insights here, I'd be tickled to hear. But that's the bulk of what I have to share during my short little spot here. So thank you. Oh,
Well, I'll kick off just a quick reflection about our tour this morning and roundtable discussion with local electeds. It's always great to be in the community. It continues to give me inspiration and drives me to continue doing the work that I do in so many different fronts. So I just like to thank all the local electeds and leaders who took the time to be here with us today and to share their concerns. We heard a lot about infrastructure. It's not unique to this area, but their specific needs are unique to this area. That's always good to hear and good to be reminded of. Really enjoyed the tour this morning, especially seeing the farm worker housing. It's a place I've always wanted to see. It's kind of been on my radar for a while, so that was really great to go there and visit. And just always a hard reminder to hear about the racism that's still very present in our communities. And I think that's a good segue into maybe my local reflections too from my community in Eugene and Southern Willamette Valley. I've been privy to be part of conversations in Eugene around housing production and barriers And we hear the same thing down there too. We hear a lot of racism, a lot of historic racism and a lot of present racism that's keeping people out of healthy places to live. We hear a lot about safety. And so it's just, I wanted to highlight that so that it's continued part of our. Beyond that, Eugene is busy. Springfield's very busy. Both communities are working on housing production strategy work, as well as climate friendly and equitable communities. And we're in that climate friendly area designation process right now. And we'll be setting up, Eugene will be setting up and Springfield will be setting up their transportation system plan changes to accommodate climate friendly and equitable communities rules in the next couple of years. Eugene is doing kind of a coordinated process amongst a couple different projects that are implementing rules that we have had a hand in here, including housing capacity analysis, housing production strategy, climate friendly and equitable communities, upcoming owner rules, as well as climate friendly and equitable community CFA requirements, and kind of put it all underneath one umbrella, which I think is the reason I bring it up is I think it's a really valuable approach for the communities down there when we talk about the engagement work that has to come along with it. Because we're all those projects are working towards a similar thing, and they are dependent on same types of people to be involved in the project to help us understand the benefits and burdens, the barriers to housing. I think it's going to serve potentially as a great model for other communities moving forward about how we engage our communities in a meaningful way, especially those who are underserved. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the results of that. Eugene's also working on a bunch of council-directed work. Happy to announce that they just completed a 7-year planning process for a neighborhood plan that was just approved by council last week. It's in the River Road, Santa Clara area. A really wonderful area of Eugene that's needed some attention for many years. On top of all that, both those communities are working to overcome some community needs. Eugene specifically, we're seeing, I think it's about a $14 million budget shortfall in the general fund. And so I wanted to bring that up because when we're here talking to local elections, we hear the same thing, right? We hear issues with budget deficits and not being able to bring in the amount of revenue they need to bring in because of state rules or state laws. They don't have the ability to adjust their revenue sources as they're set. And meanwhile, we see inflation change. And so the costs of operating a city increase, but they can't increase their revenue. And I think that has to be in the forefront of a lot of our decision-making and understanding, because what we do here impacts their budget. And if they can't increase the budget, or we can't provide the technical assistance or grant money to make that work, none of the projects we are trying to accomplish can actually happen. I think that's all I have. On that happy note. Yeah, what a great tour. Thank you to all staff for organizing. Huge thanks to Patrick Wingard for putting this all together, and for Lebanon for hosting.
Chair. I wanted to also add some of my observations from this morning, and to thank Commissioner Lazo for reminding us that we needed to work extra hard to make sure we had additional perspectives brought in, and that we were hearing about the very real experiences of the community as farm worker housing was in design, development, and construction and occupancy. So I think that really added to the richness of the discussion this morning. Thank you for the reminder. For the rest of the commission report, we have just a couple of notes to bring to your attention. And one of them is the calendar that's on the bottom of page 1. So as you'll recall, we're still trying to decide what our cadence is. We did the baby bear, Papa Bear thing, and now trying to get in the middle somewhere. When I first arrived here, we were meeting regularly every 2 months, which was a very fast cadence, and with a committee assistant who was also the executive assistant. So we've moved some things around that I think will help a little bit. In my second year here, we probably met not quite often enough. So we're going to try for a scheduling here, which makes it really hard to remember. I know what do Januaries look like? What do Februaries look like? We don't know yet. We haven't actually hit our cadence correctly. But for the rest of the year, here's what we were thinking, that we have 3 business meetings, 4 full-fledged 2-day business meetings coming up. One in June, where Vice Chair Lilac will host us in Deschutes County, and we'll be in Bend. The next one is September. The end of September will be hopefully in Scappoose. I do have to say it depends on our travel schedule will depend on how we fare in front of emergency board over the next couple of months. We are planning, we put in a proposal to them to ask for some assistance, particularly with regard to training and travel. It's very interesting the way our budgets have been crafted. You know, they really are stringent with us about the seniority of the people we can hire, and that's fine. But if you're going to hold us to that, then you need to let us train, right? So we're having a little bit of a balance problem there. We've gone back and asked them to help us with training dollars for our staff, particularly our new staff, our staff that have to keep up professional development and certifications as planners, and folks who need to be brought up to speed on systems and software and platforms in the state if they haven't worked with them before. So we do have training needs. We're asking for help with that, and we're asking for help with travel. The way we do our work is that we connect with communities. Our staff needs to be able to travel, and our commissioners need to be able to travel. That's a hard sell, as you may imagine. Sometimes to the budget ears, it sounds like such a luxury. But in fact, that's how we do our business. And if you want us to do it correctly, then you need to let us leave Salem. So those are requests that we'll be taking, or we plan to take to emergency board when they meet later in May, depending on how that conversation goes. We may have to adjust our travel schedule here. I hope to not have to do that. But anyway, the plan is to be in Scappoose the end of September. And then the last meeting of the year would also be a 2-day business meeting. December, we know we have a number of rulemakings that we'll need to actually take to a vote. And so we'd like to be in one of those communities. We've got several rulemakings, so several communities to pick from, but we'd like to actually be on the ground in one of those communities that will be affected, impacted. And so that's TBD, also dependent on what we hear from e-board in May. The meeting that I skipped over is a 1-day meeting in October 28th, probably, you know, very close to where our offices are, somewhere in that part of the valley. And the request that we'd gotten from the commission for that meeting was for a bit of a retreat. By that time, we should have 3 pretty new commissioners. So we want to do some team building. We want to have some conversations around strategy and priorities. And then I think that is the meeting where Ethan's got a hand up in the back where we'll need to take care of some housing business because we're getting close to the end of that calendar year. So we'll take care of that at that time as well. So that's about all I know. Sorry, it's a little fluid. At least we have the dates. And I'm happy to take any questions that you may have about either dates or.
Thank you, Director. And I think I had asked you this before, but I don't remember the answer. So if I did, I'm sorry. I think it was were we going to try to make it to Eastern Oregon, like over to Burns or possibly or something? And
Yes, Chair Commissioner, I think that's what we were hoping for in December. One of the rulemakings that I know will need to take place around that time will be solar siting. Or at least some hearing or conversation. So that's a community that we'd really like to connect with here shortly. And there was another one that I just had tip of my tongue, but yes, you're right. Eastern Oregon was a place that we wanted to make sure this commission got to as part of our work.
Okay, I guess the question that comes to mind is I wonder, would it, I mean, if we're going to try to, if it were to be Burns, if we were going to try to make it over there, would there be an option to maybe switch it with Scappoose? Because the weather and the roads can get pretty nasty in Eastern Oregon around December. And I would imagine that we might have a better turnout if it were earlier in the fall as opposed to December. It's just a thought.
No, thank you for that. We can continue to mull that over. I know that when we do hearings or we actually adopt rules, that it's very helpful to be in that jurisdiction. We certainly could go early on just for the conversation and the warm up. That's a possibility too, but I take your advice. You need to keep an eye on the weather.
Yeah, I used to drive through Burns a lot and in December and I at one point had to go to a car wash because I had so much ice build up under my wheel wells and it was in December.
Other notes, commissioners or preferences? Commissioner Lazo.
I'll just note that I know schedule wise, I won't be present at the September 25th through 27th meetings. And I noted from our agenda item yesterday that I think we're going to have probably a farm forest hearing in September. And I don't think there's any housing rulemaking that will come in September. Just an update. Note on that. Try to be present by video, so we may just want to talk about how the agenda plays out. But just want to make you aware of that.
I too will not be at that meeting.
In between the this is the dumb topic.
I will be on plane on the 25th.
Also not available by video, is what you're saying.
No. And I think the time change is like 9 hours on the 26th where I'm landing.
It sounds like you're going someplace warm and then
Travel abroad.
check with council on that. I think that's a no. I think that's a hard no.
I'm happy to look into
Thank you, but as always,
within our jurisdiction.
as always though, ideas welcome.
So the Hague maybe?
I mean, if we were to move, I would entertain the week ahead of that, if that was in the discussion.
We could do some polling about that. We'll do some polling, particularly since we've got two potential out. Okay.
Commissioner Porter.
I wonder if it might make sense if there's going to be a lot of absenteeism potentially in September, if we just take the October meeting and turn it into a 3-day meeting. Might cost a little less that way. Just a thought.
Okay. All right. I see some polling in our future. Thank you.
I'm putting it on, I gotta block it out now, it's just in case.
I was gonna say, if anyone has strong opinions as to that's an absolutely hard no, please let me know. It looks like folks are interested. Okay, we'll poll around that and maybe pencil, if you wouldn't mind penciling that in, that'd be great. Yes, we'll send out an email here shortly to get a better idea. I thought it would work for people. Thursday, Friday, the end of October.
Currently a Monday.
Some polling.
So we can just do the weekend.
It just gets worse and worse and worse. You all. All right, yes, we'll send out an email. Take the tenor of the committee. Thank you. The other piece that we wanted to just bring your attention to, I don't think we'll have any changes that we need to make to it at this point, but the very last page of your commission staff report is the matrix of your ancillary duties. And as always, there's 2 pages to it. One is the list of standing committees that you all are liaison to. And then the second page is more time bound. So the rulemakings that are underway, at this time, some of the other committee work that's underway at this time. So I believe even with our newest commissioner that we've managed to put a check mark in and get you some extra assignments all the way across the board. Of course, once Vice Chair Lilac rolls off, his last meeting will be with us in June. Once he is departed, we'll reshuffle some assignments depending on who's coming for the Eastern Oregon geography, what their interests are, and if any of you all are, wanting to switch up assignments with your peers, that'd be fine. But just taking a quick look at what we have for now, just want to make sure we haven't missed anything, or if anyone's, super eager to take on 2, 3, 4 more assignments, please let us know. Always welcome the helping hands. Moment to make sure your check mark is in right.
Yeah, my check marks are right. Are there, what specifically are you, would you need additional help with, I guess? Because it looks like most of these categories have at least 1 check mark. And so, Are you looking for like having two per something or any priorities?
Not necessarily, Commissioner, we just wanted to make sure that this was accurate for now. I think probably the greater need will come in the next meeting and the one following as vice chair, gives up some of his duties. And for the most part, as long as we have coverage of at least one commissioner for each of our external activities, that's.
At this point, we're scheduled to take a 15-minute break. Do we still want to?
That schedule because we have guests. Some are here already. Oh, I'm sorry. We can request public comments.
Okay, at this point, we're going to take our afternoon break. We'll return at 2:30. Deputy Director.
Yeah. Yep. No, I think 2:15 is fine if that's okay. Chair Warren. Yes, I think they're present. Yeah, thank you. Chair Warren, Director. I believe so. Yeah. Yep.
2:15.
Chair, could I just mention something for the commissioners? The we are going to print your scorecard, so sorry that's a little bit late in coming. And please fill them out. You always receive that plea at the beginning. One of the reasons we want to make sure you have hard copy is during the housing update. If you are hearing things that you would like to hear more about, that we don't have time to get to today, we would really appreciate knowing that. One of the reasons we're having, actually, I think we have a June agenda. So we have a time in June to come back and provide a briefing on the fill in the blank. I think it is the setting up of the HAPO. Thank you. So it's the setting up of the, so associated with Senate Bill 1537. I'm blanking on everything right now. Thank you. So because it's such a new and ginormous program, new to the state Housing Accountability and Production Office, if you have questions about that or as you're listening, please do list them out. Ethan will be reviewing those as we put together the agenda for June. Then also we'll also be printing out your travel and expense forms. So if you could sign those and return one to us and keep one that for your records, that'd be fantastic. Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Brenda.
Personal mile travel, the personal vehicle travel.
I believe that's coming.
Okay.
I believe it's one this. Is it? I think it's all in one on this, but let us check. Yeah, thank you. Yep, but both. You're right. It would be for both. Great. Thanks, Commissioner. Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Richard.
For your break. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a nice break. We are going to begin item 12, the request to file agency brief with Jackson County. I'm going to turn this over to you, Amanda.
I believe so, but I think Assistant Director is going to join me. So good afternoon, Chair Warren, and Commissioners. My name is Amanda Punton. Talk more directly into this. My name is Amanda Punton. I am the Natural Resource Specialist for the department. And part of my job as the Natural Resource Specialist is to help cities and counties keep their comprehensive plans and codes consistent with Goal 5 and the rules for associated rules for implementing Goal 5. I just want to mention that Gordon Howard was going to be with me here today, and due to a very large misfortune with him and his family, you have the lesser misfortune of just having me. No, just about it. All right, so what I'm going to do is provide an overview of a recent Jackson County decision to add 342 acres to their inventory of significant aggregate resources and allow mining on that land. And then I'll walk through the factors in Oregon Administrative Rule, Chapter 660, Division 1, that inform whether the department should participate in an appeal of the county's decision. So this plan amendment was adopted by Jackson County on January 3rd of this year. And then ODFW filed an intent to appeal on January 24th. The basis for the appeal was not addressing potential impacts from mining on significant wildlife habitat. So under the Goal 5 rule for Jackson County, the Goal 5 rule, like Jackson, I think it applies directly in Jackson County, or their code is consistent with the rule. And the steps for looking at impacts from proposed mining activities involve first clearly identifying the impacts on existing uses surrounding the site, and then doing an analysis of those impacts, and then trying to figure out if there are management practices that could be used to minimize those impacts. And if those are minimized, then there's a finding for that, then the decision can move forward, or the process can move forward. If it's not possible to minimize impacts to existing uses in the impact area, then an ESEE analysis can be used to justify impacting those existing uses. And I'll just say that an ESEE analysis is an analysis of the economic, social, environmental, and energy consequences of a decision to allow, limit, or prohibit conflicting uses. So one of the concerns I raised in a comment letter that I sent during the county's review of the amendment was that these steps required by the Goal 5 rule were not followed properly. And particularly for the impacts to big game habitat that is mapped in the county's comprehensive plan. The letter is attached to the staff report for this agenda item. So to get you oriented here, we're talking about this property that is between Shady Cove and Eagle Point on Highway 82, I'm sorry, on Highway 62. And then as we zoom in, we see part of the proposed mining area. So the significant aggregate resource is identified, a portion of that larger site I saw, or I showed, consisting of 4 lobes along a connecting access road. And I'll just mention that this is a very large and spread out site
compared to other aggregate sites. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm just saying that it is a very large site. It could be a good thing for providing aggregate to the area. Under the Goal 5 rule, impacts to existing uses must be identified and addressed in the area extending 1,500 feet out around the edges of the proposed mining area. So, and in this case, as I've said, one of the uses there is county mapped, designated, called especially sensitive winter range for deer and elk. I have to show you one more slide because the proposed mining area is so spread out that this one leaves off the first lobe and shows you the fourth lobe for the total area proposed for mining. However, the proposal would have no more than, I think it's 40 acres active at a time. This is also fairly common for mining sites that they move sequentially through the area for which they have authorization to mine from the local government and from Dogami. And the site has the potential to provide high quality aggregate for the surrounding community for many years. So now we're going to move into the appeal factors. That are in OAR 660 Division 1. So I'm not going to read these, but I'm just going to call your attention to A, B, D, and E, because those are the factors that we believe are relevant to our request, the department's request to participate in the appeal. And so I'm going to move on to the next slide and explain the relevance there. So for interpretation of statewide planning statute, goal or rule, we've got our rule, OAR 660-23-0180, which is the Goal 5 aggregate rule. And then for B, we're looking particularly at an interpretation of a couple sections of that rule that speak to how the impact analysis should be carried out and how decisions should be made to either add conditions or justify impacts based on an ESE analysis. D, this certainly concerns a significant natural resource. In fact, both. In fact, two. So we've got big game habitat and we have aggregate. Both are important natural resources and economic resources as well. E speaks to whether the issue is raised in the department's strategic plan, and it is, and that objective in the strategic plan is to improve contribution by government at all levels to the protection and conservation of natural and cultural resources. Can I take a moment to say that because as a staff, we all got to participate in writing the strategic plan, I was like in the room with a few people to get that government at all levels added to the strategic plan. So yeah, it's nice that it's there. And okay, so with that, I'm going to kind of flash up this next.
And I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second because we have some newer commissioners. I'm wondering if we could have a little education on the deciding factors for this case. Just maybe Steve, you wouldn't mind providing us just the framework in which we get to make this decision. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'm not sure whether to address you as chair currently or not. Interim chair. There we go. Thank you. Yeah, so when the director chooses to participate in a appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals, and participation can be as broad as filing a state agency brief, which is the request here, that comes to you for your review to authorize that participation. And the rule that you've adopted to make that decision whether or not to authorize participation is the one that's on the screen.
Let me go back
Previously. And you are asked to decide if one or more of those factors are met. And as Amanda pointed out, her presentation, that there were 4 different ones that the department considered were to be met. And unfortunately,
That's really the universe of what you're considering today. It's not the issue of deciding the case itself. That's what LUBA will do. But so your consideration today is whether or not one or more of the factors are met. Is that what you're after? Okay, thank you.
So
I thought I should probably say, I am Anjali Halava, Chair, and I'm back in the room. Thank you, Commissioner Warren, for leading so far. Thank you.
So I'm going to flash this next slide up here for a moment. We're not really ready for a motion because we, you guys have the opportunity to hear from attorneys representing the applicant. But I wanted to point out that the alternate motion on this slide is slightly different than the one in the staff report because after we did the staff report, we kind of realized this is the yes or no decision. So the alternate motion reflects a no decision and the proposed motion reflects a yes decision. And with that, I don't know if this is a time for questions of me or if we want to move on to having Misters Dan O'Connor and Garrett West provide their testimony.
Traditionally, we would hear from the applicant and the local government, but my understanding, just the applicant is, okay. And so we'd hear from the applicant and then the commission's prerogative is to ask questions of both you, the department and the applicant's counsel. So
Okay.
hear from the applicant next.
I believe we have 10 minutes. Okay. And I don't. You want the timer? Yes. Yes, please. A 10-minute timer. And it would be great if you introduce yourself and.
Of course.
presentation.
Thank you. My name is Dan O'Connor. My office address is 670 G Street, Suite B, Jacksonville, Oregon. This is Garrett West sitting to the right of me. And we represent the applicant in this matter. And I got a timer staring me down in front of me, so I'll try to be brief, and we won't get into too many details because we understand the scope of this hearing. But just for in the tone, I just want to state that we work with DLCD employees constantly. We have nothing but respect for them. We have a good working relationship also with ODF and W. Also, I know I have a couple of wildlife biologists that are irritated with me right now, but despite that, it's been a good working relation. I've been in the Valley for 25 years. One thing I just want to clarify is on the map shown, the bubbles, we call them the bubbles, that's what's shown. That's not the approval we're seeking for. That was approved already in 2010, I believe it was. And so in January of 2021, the county asked us will you please do a rezone? Because when it was approved initially, it was this bubble zoning, which is always frowned upon, and it was causing issues because activities were occurring outside of the aggregate removal zoning bubble. In that initial approval, it was a 40 or 41 acre maximum disturbance area at one time. So in a nutshell, that you could come in, mine 40 acres, reclaim that, then move on to another 40 acres. So initially, we started the pre-application process. We talked with ODOT. We reached out to DLCD, Fish and Wildlife, Thousand Friends of Oregon, because based on we do typically larger land use applications for big developments, and that's our standard protocol. We are not trying to get over on any. Through the pre-application process, we had an initial zoning map, which basically encompassed the entire property. Amanda requested that we tone it down, which we did, and we moved forward with our application. One thing to be clear is that we stipulated from day one that we would stipulate to the 40-acre maximum disturbance size at any one time, in that we would stipulate to the existing ODF&W conditions from the prior approval. Moving forward, we get to Planning Commission hearing. Oh, I'm going to say one thing. Fish and Wildlife was supposed to participate in the pre-application conference. They chose not to. We didn't think anything of it. They were noticed of the completed application. And in 2 weeks before our Planning Commission hearing, we get a recommendation of denial from ODF&W. At the Planning Commission hearing, they asked for a continuance so they could actually review the application. About 20 minutes before the Planning Commission hearing started, we received the DLCD comment about the ESCE analysis, which I know things happen, but that's not the standard course of business, how we do things. We like to work in, have sufficient time. In response to that, because the Planning Commission was just the recommending body, the Board of Commissioners was the decision maker. Once we received the comment from DLCD on the ESC analysis, we supplemented, is that correct, Garrett?
Yeah.
Supplemented those findings on the ESC analysis. And our position is, what did we do wrong here? We did every step that we should do in good planning, reaching out to the agencies. And with Fish and Wildlife, all fairness, it was extremely frustrating. Is that we agreed to the original conditions. I said we are open to additional mitigation measures. And within the first 5 minutes of the Planning Commission hearing, they made it clear if it's not denied, they're appealing it to LUBA. We reached out multiple times. The record is full of correspondence where I am guessing as to what additional mitigation can we do, with no response, to the point that we had to hire an ODF&W former employee who's a wildlife biologist to provide us with some mitigation measures, which we did. One is that we would provide on each new site $40,000, today's equivalent, for restoration plans for wildlife habitat. The other thing that we propose is on reclamation, because ODFW does not require this now, is that we would terraform the mining site reclamation to provide both deer and elk habitat, and I always forget the bird of prey habitat on benches. And so we were, how about this? How about this? We just said, we're going to do these, whether you agree to or not. The only thing that Fish and Wildlife was, we want you to do a conservation easement on 640 acres. That was not a reasonable option for us. And so we moved forward. Anyway, that's kind of the gist, Garrett.
I want to give kind of a big up in the sky view of this problem we have. 47,000 people are going to move or be born in Jackson County in the next 20 years. And we're not sure how to house them. I know this is a crisis statewide, but when you're looking at this top-down view approach, you have two things to do. You secure your supply lines and you secure your workers to build housing. This is step one. We need to secure our supply. If we do not secure sufficient aggregate at this moment, we will be forced to truck it in or train it in, like Coos County has to do, where the costs of rock are 3 times that of Jackson County. We do not have sufficient wealth in Jackson County to afford that. Yeah, I think it's hard when you're forced to locate aggregate in areas that are habitat, and I think we can all recognize that, which is why we want to mitigate impacts as much as possible. Which is why it's important to concentrate impacts to areas that have already been disturbed. And the position that I fear that ODFW is taking is that if we can't locate aggregate near or in habitat with whatever restrictions we want, then we're going to end up with dozens of smaller mines throughout Jackson County, spreading these environmental impacts everywhere. Like Dan said, we had repeated meetings with ODFW, like, what do you want? Like, what do we need to do to make this as pro-environmentalist of a facility as possible? The county commissioners, the planning commission made repeated questions to ODFW at the public hearings. And the response was nothing. There was nothing given, which is frustrating because, I feel like we're trying to go above and beyond that. As for the ESCE analysis, the technical question that you're trying to discuss today, there's actually 3 ESCE analyses in the record that were incorporated by the county in the county's order. There was the initial ESCE analysis in our application. We didn't address the habitat that much, mostly because we didn't get any comments about the habitat. Then after Amanda put in DLCD's letter, I responded with a comprehensive ESCE analysis focusing just on the habitat itself. And then to make sure that our application was as tight as possible, the county incorporated the former ESCE analysis from the first zone change. The one that Luba said was fine, the one that DLCD gave us the thumbs up, several years ago. So the record's full of the ESCE analysis. My big concern, I suppose, if you do decide to put in a brief at Luba, I hope that it's phrased in such a way that it doesn't undermine our ability to construct housing. These are complicated rules, and I think we're all doing as best we can. And we just want to make that clear.
And then we have 27 seconds left. And it's just like, we're developers, attorneys. I mean, that's what we do. And we work with the cities and so forth. And our community is trying to be strategic in our housing crisis, which is huge because we have the Southern, the California influence on our housing market. And it just became clear that with ODF&W, and they didn't really deny it, their beef wasn't with us. It was with the governor in the executive order on the housing, because it was just, what do you want us to do? Well, you could put these mining sites in the city or in the valley floor, which is our limited prime farmland. And I know I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I think I'm going to open it up to commissioners. If you have questions of Dan or staff. Either. Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm interested in the distinction between the planning that has already happened and been approved and the planning that would need to occur if Luba said, do more planning, according to what we're asking for, if I understand the issue correctly. So I'm
Sounds
looking
like
for
a
clarification. Do I understand the issue correctly, and what would be that distinction?
You have one mic to share.
If we could give staff the first response and then if
Yep. Thank you.
Chair Halova and Commissioner Thompson. I would expect that the applicant and the county would go back through the step-by-step process that would then result in conditions for protecting habitat, which is largely about not having the big game scooped away from the habitat because of the mining activity.
Commissioner Thompson.
So do I understand correctly that the existing planning that has been done and was approved does not contain mention of habitat mitigation strategies?
It does. It has habitat mitigation strategies. My understanding of the ODFW appeal and the basis for their appeal is that those strategies are not yet sufficient for protecting the habitat.
Commissioners, any other questions from staff or Commissioner Lazo?
Thank you, Chair. I think you just sort of answered this, but I want to be specific about in the letter that we sent, that the department sent to to Jackson County, we make reference to the efficiencies in the original, I'm assuming ESEE. We just heard from the applicant that they had submitted a ESEE in response to that letter. My question then is, did their response ESEE change anything in the 4 factors that we're being asked to consider today, particularly around D, the significant natural resources, which also is tied to the strategic plan then? Because I would assume it wouldn't change the questions in either A or B, but does it change the questions in either B or D? Those regard to the natural resources aspects. I think you just answered that by talking about what ODFW's evaluation.
I'll say, I think it's unfortunate in this proceeding we have here that we don't have the ability to hear from ODFW and the reason why they filed an appeal. So I can't speak to that. I can say that it will certainly hinge, or part of the conversation around the appeal will hinge on one of our rule, and that's the reason why it seems appropriate for us to weigh in on how our rule applies in this situation.
Commissioner Porter.
Thank you. Okay, here's where my ignorance is probably going to shine. So I mean, listening to your summary and then the applicant's summary, it doesn't sound like you guys, I mean, there doesn't sound like there's a disagreement necessarily between, you know, where you guys are at. It sounds like the issue is surrounding the wildlife impact mitigation primarily. So, you know, reading through the staff materials here, or I mean the packet materials here, and the 4 factors, you know, we're just to decide whether or not it triggers one of these, which if it does, then DLCD will draft a brief to submit to the LUBA appeal. Correct. That's correct. Okay. So knowing that there's a major charge right now for doing what we can to open up the doors for more housing, and aggregate, there's a lot of communities nationwide that are having, you know, struggles getting aggregate. I mean, you hear that almost no matter where you go, that there's an aggregate shortage. Knowing that that's a fundamental and critical component for housing, can you, is it too much to ask to have you tell us, you know, what the brief would include?
That might be a better question for me, if I may. So what you're being asked to authorize is a state agency brief. And what a state agency brief is, it's a little different than a petitioner's brief or a respondent's brief. In a state agency brief, when one of our rules or one of our goals or a statute that we implement has been put at issue in a case, it's an opportunity for the agency to present its position on the, you know, how it believes its rule is to function, or how a rule and a statute would interact. So it wouldn't necessarily be a brief saying, you know, on the merits, you know, this is a good idea or a bad idea, that there's substantial evidence or there is not substantial evidence. It's more, this is a kind of a précis on how a particular rule acts. So in this case, it would be the interplay of, you know, this question of clarifying OAR 660.023 180, and it's the two subsections of that rule. I think that's what we'd be offering the board.
Okay, so it wouldn't, okay, so there wouldn't be anything that would discourage necessarily the development. It's just outlining the rule.
It would be less on the merits of the development or not, but more on the what procedurally how you would comply with the rule or what level of detail the rule requires, but not, you know, the merits of the application itself.
Okay. And hopefully it wouldn't discourage the opportunity. I mean, it would just be the facts be what they may.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm always interested in the pragmatic impact of what we decide and what it means for the people who need to get something done, how they tailor it, what additional cost burden they bear or what additional time burden they bear. Because in my world, people are suffering and dying from a lack of housing, for example, and planetary influence. I mean, I feel a sense of urgency. I'm also interested in making the best use of time and money and other resources that people have. That's why I'm interested in what's the net gain and the net cost in all of this. I'm troubled that the applicant says we tried to talk to ODF&W and they didn't talk to us. I'm troubled that they're not here for us to ask questions of. But maybe I'm barking up the wrong tree, if I can mix my metaphors. Council.
I should point out that under the commission's rules, ODFW would not be allowed to be here and testify. It's limited to the applicant, the affected local government, and this department. So if that is weighing on you, there's a legal explanation as to why they are not here.
See, another chance to become less ignorant. Always a treasure. Thank you, sir.
Do we just start in discussion or does it flow? Do we have to cut off? Yeah, do you have any, it sounds like nobody has any further questions.
I've got one.
Commissioner Porter.
Real quick, just if DLCD does file a brief in this, how much extra time will that add to this appeal process, if any?
Mr. Porter, could council respond to the sort of legal process?
I'm sorry, what can you, was the question whether it adds time?
Well, yeah.
Okay, so that's a good question. Procedurally, a state agency brief is due at the same time as the response brief. So it's built into the LUBA briefing schedule in a manner that it coincides with the existing schedule. So it should not add time.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Lazo.
If I heard your question right, actually, I think her question was for the applicant, if it would add time to their process and effort. Was that more your question than DLCD's effort?
Correct. Yes, correct.
Is it going to cost you folks more money in your application if we file an agency brief? Was that the question you had, Commissioner?
Yeah. Yes, thank you for restating that so much more eloquently.
The answer is yes. It's going to cost us more time and a lot more money because we're going to have to respond to the brief. And depending on the outcome of this, I mean, it might increase the probability that we end up in the endless appeal cycle.
There's just a friendly reminder to stay, Chair, if I could, to stay close to the mic. I'm not sure that your comments could be heard. Okay, sorry. Thank you.
I had a question, Dan and Garrett. So in your testimony presentation, you didn't seem to address any of the criteria that were here today to evaluate. Is that accurate in your opinion, or did you feel?
For the written testimony, we're only limited to 5 pages to tell you everything in the world about this small piece of property. As for our comments, we wanted to give you an overview of the case itself. I hope that answers your question.
So,
Excuse me, can I
yes.
just make one point? Because Chair Halova and Commissioner Porter, I did not point it out in the images that I showed, and maybe you two can comment on this, but the quarry is active currently. So rock is being pulled out of the quarry currently, so it's not holding up aggregate production now. It's the question is how the quarry will expand in the future.
Commissioner Porter.
Thank you. And Amanda, that's very helpful. How quickly will it need to expand? And then, I mean, comparative to how long it will take to get through this process?
The process itself, the briefing process won't have any impact on operations. I mean, the whole point of this exercise is to secure a long-term 200-year supply. So there's still 5 to 10 years of operation. So in all fairness, there'll be additional cost and briefing and so forth, but it's not that a vital rock supply source will be cut off from the community.
Thank you. Deliberate discussion from conversation. I didn't even know there was something standing up there. Oh.
The carpet actually has more colors in it than until it's set up on the screen.
Been here for 2 days and never noticed that tripod over there.
Kind of look like aggregate.
Commissioner Porter, it sounds like you wanted to talk.
Thank you. You know, I guess one thing that would have been helpful for me here, and it's probably too late to do this, but it would have been helpful for me anyway, if the department, would have, I know it's some of it is in our materials here. But if the department could have walked us through, how each one of these was triggered or not triggered in their opinion, and then, from the applicants, how each one of these would have been triggered or not triggered in their opinion. That would have been helpful for the narrow scope that we have to make a decision on. And so
Just trying to see if we have our scorecard right now. We do. Hey, perfect entry. So any feedback, we can also record it on the scorecard for the future, because they actually look to see what more information we can give in the future to help with our decision. Sorry, we didn't have that yesterday. Commissioner Lazo.
Thank you, Chair. I think in these, it's always beneficial to hear what's going on in the case, but as has been pointed out, this is a pretty low bar for us to move forward for the participation that we're being asked to. I'm having a little bit harder time evaluating criteria D and E because we don't have that second ESEE. That being said, I'm not sure that because those questions are closely tied to our rule, I'm actually not sure there's a distinction, right? Because the question is, what steps do you need to take to sort of prove that? And what you're proving is the significant natural resource piece in the ESEE. So I think we get there at least on A and B. Again, because they're so closely connected to D and E, I would be inclined to leave those in. Although, again, I'm a little less sure about those given the information that we have in front of us.
And Amanda, because I wasn't didn't hear the presentation, was there a specific, I think there was a specific, I read it, there was some specific designation of an overlay of some sort, right, to the site that gave it a designation of a significant natural resource. I just wanted to have a reminder of what the name of that was.
Oh, Chair Halova, the overlay, the county overlay is the,
Aggregate removal.
oh, do you mean the aggregate or the wildlife?
Oh.
Yes, it's
Big game winter range.
especially sensitive winter range for deer and elk.
Yeah, I mean, I've been on both sides of this, like on this side, and I've been sitting over there in a development case. The thing that I found, even in the development case, it went the different direction than it's going right now, right? But I think it's really important to just be clear about what criteria we're evaluating at any given point. And for me, even though it's interesting to learn more about the different aspects of the case at hand, sometimes if we have too much discussion about that and it doesn't center on the criteria, it can make people feel like there's a false hope or not a false hope, right? It depends on which way it goes on our ability to make opinions on things that are not a part of the case that we're having. And so while I love housing, I need aggregate myself. I need affordable aggregate. All those things are great, but they have nothing to do with the matter at hand today. And nor, in my personal opinion, not personal, based on what we're supposed to do here, what we do with this case or not do with this case. And so that's one of the reasons I asked folks testifying. I didn't hear you speak to this criteria, and I think it's really important for us to speak to the criteria too. Otherwise, it gives false hope that we're going to go outside of the bounds of our authority. And so that's why I'm just sticking with if it meets one of these, then do what we're supposed to do. And whether this case concerns the significant natural resource, cultural or economic research is extremely clear defined. And that's why I wanted to hear I read it, but I didn't remember what the designation was for habitat. So even if the other ones, I think you're right, Commissioner Lazo, that if it didn't have some, if we're just making up that it's that, then that would be hard to say that, okay, that relates to our strategic plan. But since we're not making that up, then of course it relates to our strategic plan. And then I think the department made a clear case for the other ones that they made. I think when I read it, I thought actually it had something to do with an enforcement order, but then I realized, oh no, this is like very in the beginning. It's not at the end of the process. So it's not about enforcement. So our department needs to opine on the things that pertain to our rules and our regs and our laws. So to stay out of it is almost to say as if we don't have jurisdiction over those particular topics, or we're not authorized to have an opinion. So I think for me, it's pretty clear. We have to say what we feel in relation to our rules. And for me, I just try to stay out of the details of it if the details aren't contributory to what we're here to decide on today. So we've had cases like this before. It's kind of hard, because the details are interesting. We care about the details at varying degrees, depending on what we do. So I would like to call for a motion if anybody.
Just
would
say
have
one more thing.
Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Related to my colleague's comment, if I'm looking at this, if you distinguish in A, B, D, and E, which big game aggregate under each, that helps me go through the thought process that Commissioner Lazo can do already. Thank you.
Sorry, say that again. I didn't.
I'm trying to figure out how the interpretation of statewide planning state how does that apply to big game, and then how does it apply to aggregate, and the same thing under B, and that would just clarify the logic so that everybody understood.
Amanda maybe can respond.
Yes, Chair Halova and Commissioner Thompson. So in this case, we have two Goal 5 resource categories, one being aggregate, one being big game. And what the rule says is that when there is a identified significant Goal 5 resource within the impact area of a proposed new aggregate site, then the impact analysis and all the steps of the impact process, or the process of either minimizing impacts or justifying impacts based on an ESE, flows from the coincidence of the aggregate resource and the significant big game habitat.
So it is both A and B under each one.
Yes.
Thank you.
Resources.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was good. That's a good question. Yeah. Yeah, it's sort of on the, what the director, and that's why, what she was speaking to with the development and conservation, right? We're talking about, two of those things here, right? And yes, it's both of them. So we should have an opinion. We should put, whether it's an opinion on not the matter at hand, but the processes, what needs to be done, what needs to be filed. Commissioner Lazo.
Because the appeal is of a county decision to approve, is that right? And so again, I think that the point that we're making with regard to process is, those processes haven't been met. And so that the application should not have been approved by the county. And so, I mean, that's what we're moving forward. And so again, it's not necessarily a question of the underlying resource. And again, I see how Dini are implicated in that because that's the resource we're talking about. But I'm not sure that's the actual question. It's a process question, that again, the county has told us that that process has been met, and we disagree with that. What do you have to make the case for it? Have I captured all of that right?
I think with perhaps the nuance that ODFW will be suggesting that it hasn't been met, and we'll be saying, here's how we think our rule applies. So Luba, as you're deciding this case and you're evaluating has it not, here's the department's view of how that analysis should be conducted.
Also set case law for the interpretation of.
And I think that's, B, right? That's why B applies, because it would set, which is helpful to the department also, right? Just to clarify that kind of stuff. Commissioner Warren?
Yeah, I just want to point out, I think, to go off what Commissioner Lazo was saying, that the department's not the one actually making this appeal, right? We're not the ones saying that the county did it wrong. We're just working to help clarify the process. Because ODFW is the one who's making that choice.
Sorry, whenever someone says anything, it just kind of eggs on additional questions, doesn't it? So in the materials here, it says non-compliance with DLCD rules is the basis of the appeal. So this is the only basis of the appeal then?
Not sure.
I mean, if not for these, it wouldn't have been appealed. Am I understanding that correctly?
I can't answer that question at this point.
Where are you looking at?
You know, if you look at page 3 of 5 of the briefing in there, first paragraph under B, about 3/4 of the way through that first paragraph, it says non-compliance with DLC rules is the basis of the appeal.
That's the basis of the ODFW appeal. Yeah, I think that's right.
So if not for this question and this very, very narrow scope that we're deciding here today, there would be no basis for appeal.
Well,
Am I misunderstanding this?
no, I mean, I'm somewhat hampered in that I haven't seen ODFW's brief, so I don't know what they're going to argue. But our understanding is that they're going to be arguing that the county's final decision, not necessarily the planning commission decision, but the board's final decision, didn't track the requirements of the DLCD rule.
Yeah, so that is the error that they're pointing to.
Right.
That is this foundation of their appeal, I guess,
Yeah.
for lack of better words.
Our charge is to say, do we want to submit information into that process to better solve what Luba's going to say, yes or no? And in order to say, should we submit information, we have to say, does it hit one of these points. And if it hits one of those points, then the answer is yes, we should. Right. And so just the significant natural resource or economic resource, right? If we hit that criteria, then right, we should be submitting.
So then with Amanda's, assuming that you draft the brief that will go to Luba? No,
You get to?
I'm sorry.
Do I get a pay raise?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I told you this is where my ignorance
Yeah.
was gonna shine, and it is. It's just shining up there beautifully. It's okay. I will own it. Oh, where was it going? Yeah, so in the brief that's written, then, I mean, if this body approves that or decides that it triggers one of these, which then approves writing the brief, that brief will that brief then provide the basis as to whether or not the county was in error or was not in error in their decision?
So this has a little bit of that literary technique called foreshadowing, but I'm gonna guess that ODFW's brief will put one of our rules at issue, say that the local government's decision did not comply or was inadequately applied, part of the Division 23 rules, the Goal 5 rules. And then what our brief would say is, if whatever gets raised about our rules, we'll say, as the agency that has adopted the rules and applies the rules, here's how we think, Luba, you should do the analysis of this rule.
Okay. So they're going to do the substantive analysis of the rule. Okay. Okay. That's helpful.
Yeah, and this is an unusual one because usually we're before you where the agency's doing the appeal, but in this case, the appeal is happening and we're asking whether or not you think it's appropriate that we weigh in with our analysis of what the rule says.
Okay. Okay.
It's a little,
It-
it's a little, so this is an awkward one for your first one because
Oh,
it's a little bit.
You know, actually, it's probably good. You might as well learn on a steep curve, right? Okay, yeah, it's a troubling one, you know, because, you know, listening to the applicants, if they tried to engage with, you know, ODFW and they weren't getting a whole lot of response, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. And I know what it feels like to be in a, you know, never-ending circular pattern of appeals, and we certainly, you know, don't want to encourage that. That's not a good use of anyone's time and money, but I do understand our scope is very narrow. So.
Yeah, and I think we've had a similar case to this the last time, and it's like people want us to speak toward other departments, and it doesn't seem for me, it doesn't seem appropriate to, we don't know who's frustrated with who, right? We only had one testimony, which I presume they are frustrated. But we could maybe hear the same thing from the party that legally can't be here to say that. So I don't want to speak to who's at right and who's at wrong on this. I think this further shows that our department needs to submit the information that's, you know, needed, given our expertise and our legal obligation to see if we meet the criteria to participate. So, yeah. So I was hoping to go for a vote. I was, and we can ask more questions later, unless you feel like one of the criteria is not being met.
I just think we're providing the lens through which Luba will examine this issue. That's it. It's value neutral.
I think Steve said he doesn't know what the brief is yet. So I wouldn't say it's value neutral or value positive or negative, right? I think the deal is our department has to participate. So I don't want to assume, I'm not assuming it's neutral or positive or negative myself. I'm assuming that the department needs to be in the mix, given the expertise and given the matter at hand. Yeah. It sounds like Commissioner Laza wants to make a motion.
Make a motion. I move that the commission authorize the department to file an agency brief in the matter of ODFW's appeal of a Jackson County decision to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on the information included in this report and associated demonstration that OAR 660-001-023 O sub A, sub B, sub D, and sub E apply.
I second. Commissioner Boyer seconds. Ingrid, can you do the roll call?
Commissioner Warren,
Aye.
Commissioner Boyer,
Aye.
Commissioner Lazo.
Aye.
Commissioner Thompson,
Aye.
Commissioner Porter. Aye. Vice Chair Lilac has an excused absence. Chair Holover.
Aye. And with that, the motion passes. Thank you for all those that testified. Let me switch my notes. Okay. Our final agenda item of today. I didn't know when we took a break. Our final item today is agenda item number 13, which is update on Oregon Housing Needs Analysis Rulemaking with Ethan Stuckmeyer, Housing Division Manager, and Mari Valencia Aguilar, Senior Housing Planner, and Thea Croman, Housing Planner, and Karen Gullen Chapman, Urban Growth Boundary Specialist. Mari will lead, we'll start the presentation.
It's on there.
Oh, we have to run.
So this item is gonna be open for public comment, and the staff will present for like 40 minutes and then public comment, and then, but I'm sure if we need quick clarifying questions, I'm sure we can ask them while you're going along. Yeah.
We pull it from SharePoint.
Having technical difficulties. One moment.
Like, we have a Taylor reference on the record.
I suppose.
My wife will be very pleased with you, Commissioner.
Yeah, so while they're getting set up, I was gonna say there's two parts to our packet that we always get. One is reimbursement form. So you just have to sign it and put a date on the end.
You know, what if, I mean, I honestly, I don't know if I can remember the details enough of yesterday to be able to fill.
I know.
accurately.
Normally we have it at the beginning, and then we do it as we go along, but it was late.
I don't want to make it up at this.
Yeah,
point. Can we
just
Can we just do what
Yeah,
we
do
remember?
one day, whatever you remember.
That's better. Yes.
I'm with you on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll share the screen.
For those online, we're setting up the computers with the presentation, so it's gonna take a little bit longer.
There you go. Yep. One. Yep. Yep.
Okay. All right. All right. We better. No, I'm just kidding. All right. Chair, are we ready? Okay. All right. Chair, commissioners, Director Bateman, council. My name is Ethan Stockmeyer. I'm the manager of the housing division at DLCD. Really excited to be with you all. Thank you all for hanging in there. Being the last agenda item after a busy 2 days. We have lots to talk about in housing. We have the HAPO, we have infrastructure, we have the legislation, but today we're here to talk about one thing, which is the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis. So I'm here today with Karin Gijan-Chapman, Thea Croman, Mari Valencia Aguilar to talk about that topic specifically. So if we could go to the next slide. Great. All right. So like I mentioned, we have so much to update you on, but we haven't been in front of you all to talk about the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis in quite some time. In fact, not since July of 2023, when you first initiated rulemaking. So we will talk about where we've been, what we've been up to, and that's a lot. So please bear with us, ask questions, and we've got the experts here to answer those questions for you. Next slide. All right. So when you first initiated the rulemaking, we suggested and you advanced kind of a structure of a rulemaking advisory committee and 3 technical advisory committees. So this structure is kind of diagrammed here on this graphic, and it's kind of described, I would say, from left to right, or from light blue to darkest blue, or from most policy focused to most action focused. So the Rulemaking Advisory Committee is the committee of folks who are tasked to think highest policy level conversation. They're intended to be our advisors on which direction the rules could and should go in this process. The 3 technical advisory committees, the Needs and Production Technical Advisory Committee, or otherwise known as NAPTAC, the Housing Accountability Technical Advisory Committee, also known as HATAC, and the Capacity and Urbanization Technical Advisory Committee, also known as COWTAC, are all focused on particular topics, those major topic areas as they've been described and articulated in House Bill 2001 from the 2023 session, which is the quote unquote enabling legislation for these rules and the authority under which you're adopting rules. So those 4 advisory committees are advisory to DLCD staff, right? Those are the folks who we're having conversations with about how these rules could shape up, what are the technical details of these rules, and how those rules are to be implemented after you've adopted them. And there's other folks involved in that process outside of just those advisory committees, the governor's office being one of those key partners, and also a team of consultants made up of Echo Northwest, Kearns and West, and Multicultural Collaborative and Anita Gap to inform, all for the purpose of informing DLCD staff to make good recommendations to you all so you can adopt those rules by the statutory deadline for those various elements of rules. So, yes, please.
For my edification, maybe for others, when you say this rack, what is this rack?
This RAC. So this rulemaking advisory committee is focused on ONA broadly, Oregon Housing Needs Analysis work. And each of those technical advisory committees are one small part of the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis rulemaking, umbrella of things. So the rulemaking advisory committee is thinking higher level about all of those elements of the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, and the technical advisory committees dive deep into each of those topic areas.
Clarify something, Ethan? Chair?
Commissioner Lazo.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Ethan, and I think I might limit the phrasing because the RAC isn't evaluating ONA overall. There are some specific elements of it that we are working on right now. So the whole thing isn't opened up. It's, there are, and that's why there are 3 TACs too, because there are some specific questions at this point in the process that we are asking. And it also, this RAC doesn't involve HAPO. It doesn't involve Housing Production Advisory Council. There are some specific questions that are being addressed by the three TACs. So that's why it's built this way. And the RAC again is really some specific elements of Oregon Housing Needs Analysis that we're addressing, getting into implementation in 8 months from now.
Yes, right. Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Lazo and Chair Lova. We'll be diving into each of those technical advisory committees throughout the rest of the presentation. So you'll have the opportunity to learn about those quite funky and somewhat silly acronyms that we've got in front of you. All right. So what have we been up to since July of 2023? This slide is not meant for you to read. It's more of an illustration that there's a lot going on in terms of the advisory committee and the rulemaking work. At this moment, the rulemaking advisory committee has met a total of 3 times, but we've kind of described, or actually 4 times, and kind of are thinking through the higher level, like I've mentioned about the rulemaking advisory committee process, thinking through being kind of that sponge, or thinking through the bigger policy questions that have been put in front of us from HB 2001 from the 2023 session. Speaking of legislation or the legislative session, we took a pause. So the Rulemaking Advisory Committee met first in November of 2023 and again in December of 2023 as kind of an orientation of sorts, kind of just get the baseline. We took a pause until March of 2024 to make way for the legislative session, knowing that there was going to be quite a heavy emphasis on housing. We wanted to focus on that and then come back to the rulemaking after that legislative session had concluded. And as you've heard from throughout this week here, that there's legislation of note from that legislative session. The technical advisory committees have been particularly busy, meeting, probably maybe close to 10 times already over the course of March and April and coming into May here. So just kind of note that there's a lot of meetings happening quite often, but that's good because we need to make some expeditious progress in this rulemaking. I also want to kind of point on this last bullet item here, which is the housing production dashboard and the equity indicators. This is a part of the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis. However, it is not LCDC or DLCD's authority to do that work. That the legislature has directed the Oregon Housing and Community Services Department to do that work. So I just want to point out that there's a lot of questions about things like housing production targets and those equity indicators. We are advisors and consultants to that process, but we are not leading that process. Yes.
Commissioner Boyer. I'm curious if for orientation on these, I know with the Farm and Forest RAC, we actually got a video for orientation. Are you doing the same thing?
We did not, but that was a really good suggestion, Commissioner Boyer. The orientation we did not film. However, we have taken cues from that project, and we've kind of gone through a process of pre-recorded webinars to kind of have some of that content to be available for future reference, not only for advisory committee members, but for the general public as well. All right. So let's talk a little bit about some of that engagement. That's a great segue, actually. So the Rulemaking Advisory Committee and Technical Advisory Committee process is not the only way in which folks can engage in this process. We've got quite a few other opportunities for external engagement and external communications on this project. All of this is informed by the Citizen Involvement Advisory Committee, your advisory committee, when we met with them towards the end of March on the 22nd. I won't go through all the details of these. However, I'll just say each of these are aimed at a particular or a set of folks who are not either already part of the rulemaking or technical advisory committee process, or we felt like needed further engagement in this process. So we'll be doing a lot of this work throughout the late spring and summer. I also want to point your attention to the last bullet here, which is these housing need allocation webinars. So I kind of touched on this already about that's the work of OHCS and the Department of administrative services, but we'll be doing kind of an interim show and tell of sorts of how that that work is coming along. So the first version of that webinar is happening on May 3rd for the statewide allocation, but then we'll have a specific webinar on May 20th for Metro allocations. And we'll get to talk with you all about that at a future meeting. That's really quite emerging work. So we'll let that process unfold a little bit more before we bring some policy questions to you all in September. All right. So I wanted to touch on this piece of this work, which, you know, I think I'll try to speak for the housing team here, that we're pretty proud of in terms of being the first project at DLCD to kind of implement your LCDC's racial equity framework for decision making. And so I'm going to pull up a graphic, which I'll pause here because you all will become very familiar with this graphic. In fact, you'll see it 3 more times in today's presentation. So this racial equity framework for decision making, this slide in particular is something that we pull up at the beginning of each of the advisory committee meetings and kind of highlight which of these 8 categories in the racial equity framework we'll be talking about or referencing in that particular meeting. So it really sets the frame for that meeting about why we're having the conversations in each of those advisory committee meetings. At the end, and this is kind of a newer process, at the end, we've kind of instituted of each of those advisory committees, we come back to this process and kind of talk about, you know, did we actually, in fact, through the course of that discussion in that meeting, actually touch on these items? Did we have the conversations that we needed to have going in and coming out of that meeting? So I just want to kind of give a shout out to the team for really thinking intentionally and deeply about how to incorporate this racial equity framework into this process. It is really a core element of this work. And then also a special shout out to Anita Yap, who's on our consultant team to kind of help shepherd us through this process. And given that it is new, and she helped you all kind of craft it to begin with. So with that, unless there's any questions, I'm going to hand this off to each of the folks to my right to kind of talk about the technical advisory committee work that they are leading in this rulemaking process.
Commissioner Warren.
Might be jumping ahead, but I would love to hear feedback about how this is working.
Yes. Commissioner Warren, Chair Luba, we'll actually have a distinct discussion about that after we present here with the help of Commissioner Lazo. So looking forward to that discussion.
Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. My name is Karen Guillen Chapman. That's a mouthful. I can also use Karen as well, if that's easier for you. I serve as the Urban Growth Boundary Specialist with the Housing Division at the department. What I'd like to do today is give you a quick overview of where we are with the Capacity and Urbanization Technical Advisory Committee, or as Ethan alluded to, CAUTAC is the acronym I was asked not to use today, but I couldn't help myself. So from here on out, Capacity and Urbanization Technical Advisory Committee. The committee met in December for an orientation with all committee members from all technical advisory committees. Since then, the committee has met once per month in March and in April. And the reason for this cadence is these rules will be adopted January 1st, 2026 by this commission. So we have a long road ahead of us. We've got quite a bit of ground to cover. And I want to get into just a brief overview of what that looks like, what we're covering. So the 3 areas this particular committee is focused on is the buildable lands inventory methodology. You all have heard, and the department has certainly heard from partner agencies, that there's some ambiguity there that's necessary for flexibility in response to local community conditions, but there's also a need for clarity. Another area we'll be focused on is our public facilities planning and how to integrate infrastructure into concept planning and urban growth or Goal 14 urbanization planning processes, as well as the Goal 14 UGB or urban growth amendments, exchanges, or urban reserves. That's the latter part. And I wanted to highlight for you at the bottom that not only will we be looking at the rules and revisions to those rules, but guidance documents that may or may not exist. So I believe, to my knowledge, when we look at Goal 10 planning, the guidance document that was last published was typed on a typewriter in 1997. There have been some updates to have supplemental guidance, but I think we're at a point where we can clean up any updates and supplemental guidance and consolidate from older versions that are published online and still referenced today in these planning processes.
Commissioner Lawson.
I just want to point out, I think it's really interesting, having gone through the roundtable today, that a lot of the items that are on this slide right here were items that were brought up today in the discussion. Right? And so I think it's good that we're hearing that these are responding to things that we know planners on the ground are asking about. And just the point you make, Karen, about the guidance documents, I mean, those are resources that we can provide to local planners to help them. And you know, if those aren't things that sound like they've been in practice much in the past. And so I think it sounded like from the discussion today that addressing these issues and providing resources is really going to be beneficial to communities like this.
You know, Steve, you wanted to say something?
I should just add, there's a little history. We used to do guidance documents and we called them white papers, and they became utilized as though they were rules. And the courts said that these are not valid because they didn't go through a rulemaking. So the department pulled back on doing that for a period of time. So there's a little history to that it even predates me. So yeah. So there's a reason to keep halted from.
And maybe that leads to the question, how will these differ then?
Yeah, and so we'll take a close look at these and make sure that they are guidance documents and not requirements that need to be promulgated as a rule.
Steve, it sounds like we might be spending a lot of time together in the near future.
Look forward to it.
And thank you, Commissioner Lazo. That does speak to the charge we were given by this commission is hitting right dead center on what you're hearing out in the communities, the need from our department. So it's affirming to hear that from you as you're talking to community partners. Here is the racial equity framework adopted by this commission. And I thought I would share with you a little bit about how that's working at a technical advisory committee level, as it moves up through a rules advisory committee level, as it moves up to us bringing you a framework for decision-making based on these grounds. With our technical advisory committee, we started with 2 categories. We've met once in March and once in April. And we looked at what are the historical inequities we're trying to address? What exists today in our housing landscape that can be addressed within Oregon's land use system? Secondly, when we look at the rules, statutes, or the guidance, how do we look at the benefits and burdens of that, not only to the community members who are going to be housed, but to our local partners who are going to implement the policies? So when we look at small rural communities versus urban or suburban, larger size, mid-sized communities, and how does that play out? And you can imagine that these conversations at our technical advisory committee level and even at our rules advisory committee level, they get policy and they get very technical. And how is it working for us, Commissioner Warren? You asked that question. It is an intentional exercise to pull us up out of the technicalities and ask the questions of who are we planning for and what does that look like? So when zoning and housing patterns can reduce exclusion and segregation, we really need to think about land use in that way. Housing, how the housing is distributed and locations of housing when we think about infill opportunities, redevelopment opportunities, expansion, greenfields, or edges of urban growth. And when we think about our investments in infrastructure, what does that do for mitigation displacement? How does that change the community when we start to upgrade infrastructure and our public facilities? So each of those 8 categories that you'll see a few times, they have a series of questions under each. And we usually pull out a couple questions in each advisory committee meeting and try to talk through these questions of how do we lessen the historical inequities? How do we understand benefits and burdens? This can be financial, environmental, social. When we look at unintended consequences, how might we plan for mitigating those as they come later on down the road? And that's some of the areas where these conversations with committee members can really focus in on, and we get really good feedback. So I mentioned in March, what we did is we introduced to the technical advisory members the buildable lands inventory. What is it? How is it used? What's the process? And we asked the question, what do you find most ambiguous about this? and we got a lot of feedback around how do I estimate capacity? How do I look at partially vacant lands? And then constraints. There's language in the rules that maybe is intentionally vague, but how do you quantify the constraints of land and to what degree? So not all constraints are created equally. You heard today a lot about Division 23 and natural resources. There's different types of natural resources. There are significant, non-significant, and then there's a whole spectrum in between. So we focused our conversation in April around those constraints. We brought in the specialists, some of the specialists you heard from today, around natural hazards, around natural resources, and what does that do when a community needs to maximize an efficiency, that word is not going to come out right, efficiently use the land within their urban growth boundary. But at the same time, they want to use every bit they can. They have to protect all those resources that already exist there, which may mean at some point in the future, do we need more land for residential use? And what does that look like? What is the process we should go through in balancing those factors? Next, in the month of May, we will specifically address redevelopment, estimating that capacity, infill, and we'll look at those processes. And then in June, we get to this underlying challenge that many communities have been facing around infrastructure. Our public works departments at the local level work somewhat very separated from your planning and land use department. And how do we at the department integrate these two things? Because for all of us that here have worked in housing development, you can't have one without the other. There is no housing without water, sewer, streets, and the public facilities. So that is a quick flyby of what we have been doing in March and April and where we are going in May and June.
Do we ask for any questions of this section? Any questions to this section? This tack? Commissioner Warren?
Just have a comment. I mean, I think you all are nailing this. The themes in there are themes that I hear, the themes that I work with, themes I've studied, and I just really appreciate how they're lined up in the conversations that are happening.
Concur. Commissioner Lazo?
And this is going to be a little unfair question, but we're on a timeline to adopt rules by January 1st, 26. So generally speaking, when are we going to see rules from you until the end of 25?
I knew somebody would ask this question because it was the one I didn't want to answer. We will be working, I mentioned through June what's going to happen. And through the end of the year, we'll start to get into concept planning, facilities planning. And then come early next year, we start a new legislative session. So we do take a break. So we are looking at using that time to do some draft rule writing. If next year's legislative session looks anything like this year's, we'll be pretty busy. So we'll be balancing some draft rule writing with legislative session work. So you're correct, Commissioner Lazo. You probably will not hear from this committee until summer, fall of next year. Yep, that's the timeline.
It's a lot.
All right. Hi, Chair Holova, members of the commission, council. Thea Croman, housing planner with the department. I'm very happy to be here with you today to talk about the Housing Accountability Technical Advisory Committee, which we like to call the HATAC because it's fun. But I'll try to stick with Housing Accountability Technical Advisory Committee right now. So like Karen did, I wanted to sort of give you a little sense of where we are, what our scope is, and sort of what our process is going to look like. The rules around the Housing Acceleration Program need to be adopted by January 1st, 2025. You've got to break these down into three categories, three sort of phases of the project, which is what we've done right here. And the first is to develop a criteria for referral into the Housing Acceleration Program for local jurisdictions. The second is to design an efficient and effective audit of local housing barriers that exist within those communities. And finally, to coordinate a partnership strategy with the cities that includes incentives and enforcement tools. So some combination of carrots and sticks. I'll add that Senate Bill 1564 added more specific direction around the development of model codes. And that's something that we will be taking on sort of as a auxiliary part of this rulemaking process. But we have an additional year to do that. And what that looks like is still sort of TBD. I think that there has been talk about sort of reforming the tax into a kind of work group that includes members on both the needs and production tax and the housing accountability tax to sort of bring together these two areas of expertise and interest. This somewhat befuddling map gives you a visual of what the Goal 10 process looks like and where this new work kind of can nest in with that. So I'm not going to spend too much time here, but I do want to say that there's sort of 3 bubbles in the middle that we're working through right now. And so I want to talk a little bit about the referral process, which is, I guess, actually pull it back a minute. The first step is to determine progress towards outcomes, the relative city progress towards outcomes, and identify some subset of cities that is, quote, lowest performing. There is broad latitude in how that determination is made, and that is one of the first questions that the TAC is wrestling with right now. It's informed by total production, affordable housing production, and by equity indicators. So those are 3 sets of data that are included in that determination. Uh-oh, I skipped back somehow. Sorry, bringing you back here. From there, we get into step 1, which is kind of the referral into the housing acceleration program. And that how many cities that will be, who, how to identify which cities those are really rests on the data that we bring in. So again, another sort of big question that the TAC is wrestling with. After the referral, there is an audit of the barriers to housing production that's proportionate to that referral. So it's responsive to the reasons that a city was referred in. And finally, based on the results of that audit, there's an acceleration agreement that we develop with the city, how to go ahead and address those barriers.
I missed the part about, maybe I'm just distracted for a second about the process for being accepted into the accelerator. Did you mention that?
So yeah, the process is, we look here at the sort of, see those top bubbles, the housing production reporting, the housing dashboard, the housing production dashboard, which is something under development at OHCS currently, along with the city's housing production strategies. Those elements come together, and there's so many details. I could go real deep on this, and I'm very happy to, get deeper into that conversation, maybe in the question and answer period. But essentially, DLCD makes a determination of which cities are referred. So there's some determination of which cities are lowest performing based on these sets of data. And then we can kind of respond to that, hopefully proportionately. That's the intention.
Commissioner Lawson.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I was going to ask, I guess this is a little bit in the weeds, but I was able to, I went into the live stream so I can see the details on this graphic now, actually. Should the arrow from the HPS in the top right be pointed into the top blue box rather than down to the mid-cycle evaluation? Because should it run through the housing equity indicators evaluation?
sorry, let me just try to follow your arrows.
Yeah, you're pointing at
You're
it.
talking,
Ar-
you're talking
arrow-
this one with the HPS.
Yes, I see that it's,
Should that-
yeah, so maybe should it go into the box to the left? So those two things feed into.
They're sort of parallel. Is that, I mean, they're, you go ahead, Ethan, if you, yeah.
Chair Lova, Commissioner Lazo, the housing production strategy, well, let me start first with the dark blue, which is the housing production dashboard, right? That is a running tab of how local governments are faring in terms of producing housing and how the housing that they're producing is meeting particular equity goals. The housing production strategy is a policy response that a local government will embark upon to bring those numbers closer to the targets. So the housing production strategy the actions that you take and the results of those actions feeds into the housing production dashboard, but it's not directly connected to that.
Yeah, Chair Holliva and Commissioner Lazo, I think that they're ultimately those strategies, we hope that those strategies will have an influence on what's reflected in the dashboard. But in terms of what DLCD will be analyzing, it will be sort of these two separate elements. And again, we can kind of get into some of the nuances of that process. I think that for now, this is sort of the general flow of that process. Here's the third time you're seeing this racial equity framework for decision making, which has really become sort of a touch point and a foundation for the rulemaking that we're working on here. There's a lot of places that the work of this TAC intersects with the questions within this racial equity framework. But I wanted to highlight a few that seem particularly relevant and sort of top level. So the first one is that the entire policy context here is connected with the history of housing discrimination, particularly in Oregon. So historical inequities are really sort of baked into the very reason for engaging in this work right now. I wanted to move to accountability, which really is sort of intended to ensure that local governments take all the action that they can within their power to support the provision of needed housing, but particularly to address and correct for that historical inequity and exclusion. And it's also a framework to hold us accountable, the state, so that we can be as responsive as possible in the ways that we can to, and keep this, keep that history sort of top of mind as we move through our process. I'll say that the work of developing equity indicators, which is something that's going on in OHCS, but that we are very involved with, it was directed by statute. It's already highlighted a lot of data needs, I'll say. So particularly data needs for historically marginalized groups. And I think that, this is certainly a problem for us as we try to grapple with the reality of, of housing, of housing need. But we also anticipate and have already seen that it's an effective pressure point to spur a lot of change in the data environment. So that's one thing that we keep coming back to in our TAC is sort of that that tension between the data that we don't have and what we need to respond to. And finally, I'll say that the equity indicators that I was just talking about, along with the production dashboard, are all intended to really make this measurement transparent, so that all Oregonians can be really included in that ongoing review and evaluation, which speaks to this this box over here at the bottom, measuring and evaluating outcomes. So we hope that this becomes just a like far more visible process, and that's part of the work of the TAC.
Commissioner Thompson.
I'm very interested in valid data. I'm also curious about your commitment to looking everywhere all over Oregon for missing data. I'm assuming it's there, but I just wanted to clarify that.
Chair Halava and Commissioner Thompson, it's a really, really good and super important question. And I'll caveat this with, this is not us doing that work. It's the Oregon Housing Needs, or OHCS, Oregon Housing and Community Services, which is our sister agency. We're working closely with them, but it's far outside of our scope to sort of enter the conversation about how to collect that data. However, I think that understanding that the data environment is really uneven in different regions is key to the work that we're doing. So one of the ways that we are intending to respond to that is by thinking about data in other ways, apart from just the numbers that are available to us right now in this admittedly very data poor environment. So thinking about qualitative data that we can collect from communities, thinking about lived experience, thinking about ways that we can bring people into this process and encapsulate sort of the range of realities that exist within this state that has, you know, massive differences from metro to rural and, you know, east to west, north to south. So I appreciate that comment, and it's absolutely something that we're grappling with along with OHCS.
Was it in Coos Bay that we had somebody came and talked to us about data in relation to this and how difficult it was? So that's a good video to go back to. Does anybody remember something that, yeah, can direct us back to that? I just found it really insightful.
If I could, just real quick, Kirsten Green here, Deputy Director, and just briefly, Ethan knows this too. He's not as grabby at the mic as I am sometimes, but he, having worked at OHCS, he knows this firsthand, but I wanted to reassure Commissioner Thompson too, and you may know this, but Oregon Housing and Community Services does have a really great data and analysis team. Far predates our work, and this topic back to the statewide housing plan. So they had, I think, one person, and now they've been growing that unit, and they do have some of the best thinkers that we've seen in this, and we're kind of wrapping around their expertise. The demographer you were thinking of was with Portland State University on population projections, disaggregated by race. Thank you.
Commissioner Lazo.
Sure. The other thing I'd offer, Commissioner Thompson, is I think that it's hard for us that are involved in the rulemaking, because this thing is happening separately over at OHCS. We don't have much control over it. It feels nebulous. But I think Deputy Director Green, what you said about OHCS is exactly right. What I would encourage folks to do is OHCS had developed a statewide housing plan about 5 years ago. And in conjunction with that, they actually released a set of data reports that were not only captured kind of the housing profile for the entire state, but actually captured the housing profile for every single county in the state. It's super, super helpful. And so it really encourages me that yeah, they are really tuned in how to understand and find housing data in local communities. So that's, I think I would be concerned if I didn't know that data existed. But yeah, it is a little hard to sit over here and rely so heavily on the equity indicators that are coming out of there without having some control over it. But that gives us, I think, some hope.
Thanks, Commissioner Lazo. I'm going to go ahead and sort of hurry through the rest of this. There's so much to talk about. I love talking about it, but I definitely want to leave a lot of space for Mari and the amazing work that they're doing over there in NAPTAC too. So just want to highlight some of the sort of big policy tensions and conversations that we're having in the HOTAC. And we've heard a lot from cities that are concerned about partnering in a way that is very clear, makes their success very achievable. However, there's also some some concern that a really standardized process, a really objective process misses important nuance. So that is one of the critical sort of dimensions that we're working on. It's a spectrum. When we get down to writing rule and when we come back in June, we'll, you know, hopefully have drafted something that threads the needle that is contextual, both contextual and predictable. But what that looks like yet to be determined. Another one of those is the question of sort of, should we go broad and shallow in referring communities into this program, or should we go narrow and deep? And again, this is one of these, you know, it's a spectrum. We hope that we can, you know, find a place in the middle that both affects statewide, you know, housing production, but also helps communities sort of really, you know, like solve some critical issues that they're dealing with. So lots to talk about there. I'm going to go ahead and just move on before I get too stuck in here. Here's some other questions that we've been talking about. We can come back to this slide if there's time during discussion. And again, we'll come talk to you in June about this. This just gives you sort of a visual of our meeting process. We're right here at the end of April. We've gotten RAC feedback. We're looking forward to hearing from you. Throughout May, we'll be developing some policy alternatives, and then throughout June, developing those draft rules. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Mari so we can get y'all moving on. Short. Ready? Careful, give me the cord to the camera. Yeah, I'll just. You're fine. No, you're okay.
I wish I was taller in these instances. Yikes. Thanks, Sia. Good afternoon, Chair Halava, commissioners, and council. For the record, my name is Mari Valencia Aguilar. I use she or they pronouns, and I am also a housing planner with the housing division here with the department. I'm going to end our discussion with giving you an overview of the final technical advisory committee called the Housing Needs in Production and the NAPTAC, where we don't take naps, I promise. So like my colleagues, I'll also give you kind of a rundown of our scope. We've got tall orders in the Needs in Production Technical Advisory Committee. Specifically, we've got two big topic areas that focus on the Goal 10 process. What Thea just described as part of the Goal 10 process, but this is ahead of the program that local governments could find themselves in should you know they meet some of the criteria that the rulemaking is grappling with. So the first topic area is specifically grappling with the ONA policy, right? The Oregon Housing Needs Analysis methodology now providing housing allocation across the state by affordability brackets, how local governments will take that allocation and translate that out into housing types, characteristics, and locations. The second topic area is responding to a change in statute, specifically the Housing Production Strategy statute, that now requires local governments to affirmatively further fair housing. This is monumental and this is big. We are the first state to kind of operationalize the AFFH mandate, affirmatively furthering fair housing mandate in this manner in land use. So there is no roadmap so when I say it's a tall order, this is big. So the NAPTAC is grappling with these two major pieces that are part of the Goal 10 process. And then the completion of this work requires rules by the end of the year, specifically January 1st of 2025. There's a third piece to this technical advisory committee that doesn't require rules, similar to my colleagues. It's kind of a topic area focused on the development of adoption-ready strategies. Another tool, another resource to support local governments in their obligation to meet housing production, affordability, and choice under their Goal 10 obligations. So as Sia said, we might merge HOTAC and NAPTAC, needs and production and housing accountability, and possibly even CowTAC. And we've got that slated in the fall and spanning over 2025. So with that, let's see here. Now I'm going to take us into, give you kind of, before I dive into the feedback or some of the discussions that we've been having, I just want to give you kind of an outlook of what's been happening in the NAPTAC side of things. We've met 5 times, each time for 90 minutes roughly. And yeah, the discussions have been exciting. They've been robust. They've been heavy. They've been emotional in all the right ways for me, I feel. But if you know me, you know, I'm a water sign, so I'm pretty emotional. And these things, I'll cry happy or sad. Let's see, the way that we've structured the meetings is really starting exploratory and then, you know, progressively moving deeper and deeper and deeper. So the first 2 meetings, we kind of broke out the first 2 topic areas, with the first topic area of the translation of needed housing types, characteristics, and locations, and really asking the NAPTAC to give us feedback on exactly what housing types, characteristics, and locations local government should be planning for. And I did not follow my colleagues in showing you the graphic of the racial equity framework. I think you all kind of get the gist, but what I will say is we spotlighted the first 2 categories of the framework, specifically historical inequities and benefits and burdens. So what that looked like in the discussion is NAPTAC, when you are offering your feedback, when you think about housing types or characteristics and locations, you know, who is benefiting, who is burdening, and how can we address those historical inequities of the past in planning going forward. Then on the second meeting, we did an exploratory discussion also for the second topic area of affirmatively furthering fair housing. And this one's kind of a natural pairing between the 2 categories of the racial equity framework, right? The AFFH mandate is specifically focused on addressing past harms and past inequities. And so what that looked like is NAPTAC, when offer your feedback about the opportunities and the challenges of integrating this framework into our current Goal 10 framework, and thinking about how to advance some of the work that we have on the HPS side or the Goal 10 side to further advance equitable outcomes on the ground, keeping those lenses of who benefits and who burdens. The next 3 meetings, we dove deeper, but we separated the types, characteristics, and locations out among the 3 meetings. And we built off of what we heard in those first 2 meetings and asked exactly, you know, how can local governments really think about housing types, in planning for housing types in their Goal 10 process, or characteristics and locations. And we've got really good feedback, which now I will get to. So I will, in this first slide, I'm going to focus on that first topic area, specifically, let's see, what we're hearing in the NAPTAC side is generally members feel like all types as outlined in the needed housing statute should be planned for by local governments. We haven't heard any qualms or any kind of pushback in that regard. It's pretty clear though, that housing type and location are elements that local governments, you know, are typically and have historically been planning for. You find them in land use codes, you see them in ordinances. On the characteristic side, though, the that's a little bit different. It's not as prevalent. Not to say that it doesn't exist. For example, we do see porches or building orientations. Those are found in land use codes and ordinances. But there's not really a direct relationship between those two. In other words, just because a house has certain characteristics or features, it doesn't mean it fits into a specific category of type and vice versa. So, and to kind of underscore that point, I can give an example. Townhomes, typically are multi-story structures, and they have multi-levels or floors, and it doesn't lend itself well for, say, an entire single level lifestyle. But the discussion at the NAPTAC is, could it? Is there a way to consider characteristics in this discussion with types, and what could that look like? So you can tell we're still kind of grappling with these important elements in this work. And then we also heard the NAPTAC offer additional elements of characteristics, things like affordability, cultural relevancy, accessibility. So how do those show up in land use code and ordinances? That's part of the work here of the NAPTAC. Before I shift over to location, I'll say one last thing on affordability, this characteristic type. We know it's not determined by the type of housing alone. There's multiple factors that influence kind of affordability. That may include subsidies or tenure type, long-term affordability structures. They play a big role. And so most types can accommodate various affordability levels, except for extreme cases. I'll note that. We heard loud and clear from the NAPTAC, and specifically one member comes to mind, Shannon Billhauer from the Habitat of Humanity offered an example where in her work, she is working with, she's serving low-income households and meeting their needs through home ownership, specifically in townhomes. So, we're kind of seeing some of the discussions we're having on the ground already. And we're hearing these examples, they're bringing it forward, and it's been really great to hear. So housing types, maybe not a driver of affordability, but I don't think the NAPTAC is suggesting that there should be. And in fact, I don't think they are, which is great because this kind of aligns with the principles of the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, which centers housing choice, right? So ensuring that we're not limiting households to only certain housing types. The last kind of nugget I'll offer to you from the discussions we've been having is focus on location. Generally, the NAPTAC agrees that all neighborhoods should be mixed use and compact and in close proximity to amenities and multimodal, all the good things that we want in our community. But I think what they're also grappling with is the existing dynamics of what we see on the ground and how is that possible. For example, there are well-resourced neighborhoods and they have all the amenities. Should local governments focus their energy on building affordable housing in those? But what about the well-resourced neighborhoods that also need affordable housing? Should local governments be focusing on those, or is it both? That is where the NAPTAC is at. Now I'm going to move us into the second topic area of affirmatively furthering fair housing and offer you kind of what's coming up so far. And here we heard loud and clear that the land use planning system and most existing systems and structures still have not truly reckoned with legacies of racism and other oppressions. NAPTAC folks offered feedback along the lines of planning staff, departments, up the chains of leadership in those departments, outside of planning departments, they're all at different levels and no one's starting maybe from the same place, but it does present challenges when thinking about housing planning and trying to work towards fair and equitable housing outcomes. They also offered things that beyond what we see in local governments, that reckoning hasn't it really existed in the community. And maybe things that we heard was NIMBYism could be manifested in some of that gap in reckoning. And so, that's heavy feedback, but our members' expertise also got them thinking about, knowing this or this feedback, how can that be improved in the goal 10 planning system? And so they offered things like, well, we're realizing the housing production strategy report currently doesn't have a historical analysis requirement. There is no geographic analysis requirement, and maybe there should be. So that's something that we've been hearing. Yeah.
What about the housing production strategy work with the gentrification displacement tool? I mean, not through this process, but through the other process. So that's House Bill 2003 from 2019.
Yeah, memory.
Burned in my brain because I was on it. Aren't there requirements as a part of that to address spatial, racial, and other inequities?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Chair Halava. The rules do not require them to use that anti-displacement analysis. They only require that their work ultimately achieve fair and equitable housing outcomes. And one of the factors is anti-displacement gentrification. So there isn't really a mechanism in the rules itself to say, you should actually do this analysis to come out with that outcome and therefore act on it.
But the department has the discretion, right, to look if you ask a question about this, and let's say somebody gives a one-line answer, like they didn't do any work to answer it, right? The resource being provided to the jurisdiction was a lot of work, right? To give a tool to make it easier. So there is some mechanism within the structure to say one must have considered something. And if one didn't, there was a tool available.
Thank you.
It's the one thing we really didn't want is somebody just to spend, that's a huge burden to invent that. Right. And so that's one reason the department paid professor from PSU to essentially develop a resource for local jurisdictions. Commissioner Warren.
And also just second on top of that is the equity analysis in the CFAC rules is incredibly effective for accomplishing a lot of this information, especially along qualitative lines. Once you have the qualitative data, it's pretty easy to expand it into more quantitative data, especially on spatial analysis.
I'm a big fan of, I don't want people to lose sight that there was a lot of work put in, and even just a reminder to the folks that you're talking to that there is this tool. We should take advantage of this tool. That somebody knew that was like, there's no resources, right? Commissioner Lazo.
Thank you, Chair. And the other thing is, it's not in the rule now, but it could go in the rules, right? I mean, so that's a clear suggestion that we're about to bring draft rules forward. It clearly can go into the needs and production work. And so I think, if you're suggesting that needs to be addressed in the rules, then I think that's great feedback.
Thank you, Chair Halava and Commissioner Warren and Commissioner Lazo for all those comments. You all are exactly spot on some of the things that the NAPTAC is grappling with, right? This identification in the rules, this tool. And then an opportunity that we have as part of the rulemaking is that we've been offering is guidance document. And so, what it meant, yes, there's this resource, maybe that's on us. Maybe we needed to, better offer or elevate the tools that exist. And maybe there's an opportunity also in the guidance document that we're going to develop to emphasize the tool. If say, for example, that becomes a rule, I'm not sure. That's on the table, I think, and that's kind of where the needs and production TAC is.
Yeah, and that's I've been hammering that point for a long time. Is that I just people tell me about new groups and governors group and all this, and I'm like, and then they ask me as a developer for advice. I'm like, we have a housing production strategy document, and everybody's like, what? I didn't know, right? And so it's so frustrating to me, given the hours spent on that, the idea that would go on the shelf. And I'm going to bring it up again. I would love to see that as a database, as a place, so that people just keep on pointing people to this database, and then we build. They'll be like, why are we doing that? Let's just build on the database. But as long as it exists in paper and PDF, it's never going to be used. And I would say the same for that kind of work is like, there should be like a place where we already have this dashboard started by this idea of like, here's how we're doing. There should just be like, click here for that tool, click here for that tool. And it's just a part of the dashboard. So I'm gonna keep on saying it. I know there's no funding to go with my idea, but it's the dream. And to me, it's the dream for the United States of America, not necessarily for Oregon, because if we have that easily accessible, that becomes a tool for other states and other cities. And I think that's important. So we're not there to the discussion yet, but I was like, I gotta say.
Halva, I appreciate that. And you keep bringing it up.
One day there'll be a pop.
But yeah, I think it's important, right? I am, this is public. So look, others are listening, and hopefully those are, some of our partners here to kind of reinforce, the attempt and the partnership that DLCD is working towards and striving for with local governments. And how we continue to nurture that is exactly what we have to think through in the NAPTAC, bringing all these together. And yeah, I feel like your dream, I hold that dream. I think this team holds that dream, and maybe the feds could come through with some money. We're waiting. But just to wrap up, this is my last slide. That was a lot that I just offered to you. Like I said at the beginning of my presentation, the discussions have been rich, they've been robust, they've been exciting, and they're helping us really respond to the big topic areas that I introduced to you in my segment here. I'll just end here by offering what's coming for the needs and production. We are diving deep into the how. So what I've been describing to you is the needs and production TAC, really grappling with the what. So needed housing on housing types, characteristics, and locations, and the who, fair housing. AFFH fair housing is really about protected classes and merging these two. And so May is going to look like, we've got 3 meetings left before we kind of pause. May will look like, how do we bring these, the what and the who together to respond to the how and the why? And with that, I will turn the meeting back to you, Chair. And yeah.
Okay. So we're technically supposed to end 5 minutes ago, but I thought I would like to go to 5, and so we can get our full, this is a big presentation and moment. So I thought, not that we have to go to 5, I just want to give the room. Yes, we could give we could do a 5-minute break. Let's do, just as needed. Okay, so we're breaking.
Is there a specific piece on the racial equity framework still?
Was it a presentation on the racial equity framework, or was it open for question now?
I think it was open for question, but we were hoping we could offer some spotlighting time for Commissioner Lazo, who's been the liaison to this.
Commissioner Lazo.
Yeah, to this work.
Or you want to take a little break or no?
Well, I'm wondering whether you should wait till Commissioner Thompson comes out to say your thing, which sounds awesome. And maybe we have any other questions. And we'll just wait till she comes back, and then you can say that. Questions for anything else that were, Commissioner Warren?
I have a question about how we're distributing housing types. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but I think you understand what I'm talking about. When we talk about like the housing need, and then we break it down into housing types. I'm assuming that's going to be different for each location. Is that true? Like, and by location, I mean city.
Yeah, so thank you, Chair Halva, and thank you, Commissioner Warren, for the question. I think I'm going to respond hoping that I understand your question, which is the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis will offer an allocation of housing need, and it's going to be organized by affordability. It won't include a set of types in that. That actually is that's what the needs and production is TAC is grappling with, is how to support local governments who will be empowered to do that. How?
I was also wondering about types, and I just couldn't formulate a question. Partly because I guess my note was, what did I write? Oh, I know what my note was. And this is very deep. This is technical. This is, it's good. But the thing I was thinking about was what people want on types versus what they can afford on types. And so I was a part, I for my work, I did a Black home ownership engagement survey with the Portland Housing Center to see what do Black homeowners want. And part of that survey, we did little drawings of different types and ranked the types, but then also what's the price point, right, that you can afford. And I think we knew going in that there was, and I think it works in other communities, not just the Black community. A lot of people want single family homes, right? But not necessarily the ability to afford a single family home now in this current market. And so without heavily some kind of heavy subsidy. So it's just, I know you're thinking about this, but yeah, there's a disconnect. And also what can the market produce, right? Within the time and the speed or whatever the case is. So there's no, I'm not saying any guidance on this. I just know the struggle that you're diving into.
Sure, if I could respond to that, and Madi, feel free to jump in here. But I think an important thing that I think gets lost in just the conversation about ONA is, I just want to highlight what Madi is saying, right? The ONA Oregon Housing Needs Analysis will estimate housing need across the state, and that has many factors of need. The allocation to local governments comes in the form of affordability, housing needed at certain affordability levels. The responsibility of the local governments with that in hand is to articulate the types of housing that they will plan for in terms of types, locations, and characteristics to meet the entirety of that affordability need that they've been allocated from the state. So those are policy decisions, local policy decisions on how to respond to that regional and statewide allocation of need. And that's a key point, because that decision-making and that policy-making should be of the local government, not of the state, to prescribe the location of that housing, not to prescribe the characteristics, but instead to kind of provide the resources and the guidance and the support for local governments to make those decisions on their own accord that are meeting those goals of the state.
And that was a great part about I'll bring it back, the housing production strategy work that was done, was that it had a filter for housing, which strategies match with which affordability level, which could help promote a certain affordability level. And I like that idea now that you've explained it, because the local governments are going to get the affordability, then they're going to have to figure out which types are going in our community specifically are going to be lend themselves more to that affordability based on what they see and funding availability, and then ability to bring in strategies that essentially help to bring down that cost to whatever it is, whatever type that they are desiring. Okay, so I thought maybe Commissioner Lazo, you would talk about the framework. The racial equity.
I'm going to talk about a few different things.
Talk about all the things.
Just got an experience in general in housing, and I do want to end on the framework so that we move into the next kind of final part of the.
You're the liaison.
To
the RAC. I just wanted to say for everybody to know the special role that you play.
I'll talk about my role in a second, but I do want to also note that we talk about the list, the strategies and tools that you started, Chair, a little bit facetiously, and we joke about it, but I will tell you that this work cannot move forward without an improvement to that tool. It is an integral part to the strategies and tools that is part of these products. And so there will come a time when it is implemented in a way that is much more user friendly. So that I can guarantee you that we don't move forward without that happening in some way, shape, or form. So it is part of the conversation, but yes, we do need to find some way to have resources to it. The other things, so I'll point out to folks that my role in this from the commission itself is I am the liaison to the rulemaking advisory committee. I am also a member of the technical advisory committee, the Needs and Production Technical Advisory Committee. Also, I should note on that technical advisory committee, I also serve as a subject matter expert, having come from the fair housing movement. And so also have been helping work with the team on the expertise side around fair housing. And so I've greatly appreciated the opportunity to work with you all on all these pieces. I spend, you saw that the schedule, we meet weekly and I get to talk to the team weekly. And so it's been an incredible amount of time with this. When Ethan said that, we haven't heard about this since July of 23, I was like, what? I've heard about it every week since like about 2 months ago. So it really surprised me. And so I think where I'd start out timeline wise is also talking about, I've been a part of this very specific conversation for about 5 years now, going back to the first legislation in 2018 and 2019. And I really couldn't have imagined that this is where this conversation would have ended up today in this moment. And it's incredible to me. I think the work that is being done on this particular piece that we could have imagined 5 years ago is amazing to me. It's far beyond, I think. I guess we should have expected that, right? You can sort of have a kernel of an idea and you think, why can't we just do it this way? And then it expands exponentially into having to answer 40 different questions. And that's where we are, right? From having said, see, I don't think the goal 10 housing planning system is really working to create fair and equitable outcomes. It's pretty clear that that's where we are today. So how do we change that system to get there? And that's essentially what is happening. We recognize this is a significant change in goal 10 housing planning, the most significant change we're going to see in 50 years. It's hard to envision it because it's also operating in parallel to the current system. So at the same time we're changing it, we're also responding to how we're doing it today, hearing about the concerns we have today, and we're trying to move the system in a way that really, again, is intended to have, as we talked about, those outcomes of greater production, greater affordability, and greater choice. That is what we are trying to accomplish with this work. And it's work that will take some time on the ground to get through. We will see results. We won't see results for 5, 10, 20 years. But when we see the results, that is what we should see in every single community that is involved in this. Greater production, greater affordability, and greater choice that wasn't present if we stayed on the same path we were before around goal 10 housing. So that's my spiel on what we're trying to accomplish here. And again, with the piece that you all presented today, it's the last mile of a very long journey to answer those questions in the 3 TACs, and then we are moving forward with the implementation of it, with the methodology that will come from Oregon Housing and Community Services, and away we go on this new path around goal 10 housing. So that's the charge that's before us over the next 6-8 months. So keep that in mind as we are receiving the draft rules. Is it getting us that last mile? And Chair has been involved for many, many years also, so I'm hopeful that that's what you're seeing coming out of this.
I mean, I was recruited to be on this commission. I think we're going to be doing something around goal housing. That was like, I was attracted to me. That's the kernel was, I think.
I think same for me too. And I could never have imagined again to seeing the body of work that has come. And that brings me to the racial equity framework. I'm so appreciative of the way that has been implemented in this. I've been through a lot of other processes that talk about racial equity, that try to implement some kind of framework. And I've brought it up a couple times to this rulemaking advisory committee process. I said, here's what happens when you do that. We talk about it in the beginning, and then people go on and go to support their agenda. And so what I appreciate about what you all have done here and the way this is working, the tax is the dedication to making sure that we are implementing the framework in these decisions that are going to be made. So not just in the meetings themselves, but I had a really one of those kind of late night email epiphanies, and I'm like, what's the next step for this racial equity framework thing? I don't want you all just to check off some boxes, because if you look at the state's racial equity requirement right now, it is not that powerful. This is very different. I said, that's not going to cut it if we do that. I said, so what's the plan? I said, here's one thing we could do. We could say, let's keep track of all the things that were said or talked about with racial equity framework. Tell us how what you heard, tell us how that affected the rules, and then tell us how that shows up in the rules. So I fired off this late night email to Mari and Celestine. I said, I'll start with you two. You know, what do you think? Because I'm working with you on NAPTEP. And Mari emailed back and said, well, actually, here's exactly, or she's, you know, there's our next planning meeting. She said, here's exactly what we're doing. It's actually exactly that. And so it's just, again, so so grateful to see that work moving forward. I don't know what the outcome will be, but we're certainly would have very different outcomes if we didn't hold ourselves accountable to a process like that. And that's what that question for me was about, accountability. How are we going to hold ourselves accountable to actually implementing this framework? And that's what it will look like in the end. And so I'm super excited to see that and go through that process, and appreciate the dedication you all put to it. It's amazing to see that the framework being at work. It's tough work. I mean, it's tough to sit and attack with so many perspectives and try to really bring people along on a framework. That's, you can only imagine. So great that you all taking that work on.
Thank you for your service on the on all those meetings. Any thoughts, comments, questions? I was gonna, yeah.
Yeah, Chair Lovett and Commissioner, I mean, appreciate your service for taking the time to, you know, meet with us and help us through that process. Cause I know that I think that's been pretty informative to how we structure those meetings and really taking that intentional approach to this process, and not only having the conversations, but, you know, starting those meetings, coming back at the end, reflecting on those is a really, I think, key way that framework will be incorporated. I do want to just point out the next time we'll be in front of you will be in June. At that point, I don't want to promise anything that we can't actually achieve, but the hope, at least, is that we come back with the first iteration of actually putting those racial equity framework pieces, each of those 8 categories, into action in terms of how we're responding to those directly in a draft version of the rules. So that's the hope. If we can't make that happen, it'll happen through the Rulemaking Advisory Committee at their meeting in July, but it's right around the corner in terms of actually seeing some of those words on the paper.
Because I wasn't here in commission business, I didn't get to say any thoughts on what's going on in my region, all that kind of stuff. I just thought I'd make some housing thoughts. One is I went to Habitat for Humanity Portland region fundraiser, and they were talking about the first affordable housing project being built in Lake Oswego. They made it sound like ever. Everybody cheered, lots of people in the room. So I was going to say, I think there's a movement going on thinking about opportunity and choice and access and affordability. So we're part of that movement, I guess. And so is the city of Lake Oswego. Another thing is I spoke at the Urban Land Institute conference in New York, their spring conference. And so that's the organization. It's kind of like developers organization. It was really cool. I spoke on a panel called Developing Missing Middle Housing. There was a whole long part to the rest of that title, but it was dealing about like tools and tips and policy. And so I half spoke on House Bill 2001 from 2019 about housing choice. So I just kind of went over like, this is what the state of the LCD is up to. And then I half spoke on my own project I'm working on. That's a affordable missing middle homeownership project in Portland for the Black community. It was awesome because the panel was actually 4 of us and 3 were women developers from Oregon. So we represented. And the other 2 developers were talking about their project is called Short Stack, and it's a middle housing mass timber like the idea of these modules and kit of parts that they like apply on different sites. So they've come up with that and going for missing middle housing. So that was really good. And just the room was packed, really receptive, lots of questions. And so and then they ended up writing a story. I didn't know, sometimes the ULI writes a story on one of the panels. They end up writing a story on that. So I was gonna say, the more we get out and tell people, I think that was my big take home from going to New York. It's like anytime I talk about Oregon things, people are like, what? How? Tell me more. So I think we undervalue ourselves when we're here. And I was just say, get out and talk to a couple people and you'll see. So I just thought I'd end with that positive note. So unless there's further questions, comments, I'd say great job and hard work. Thank you for all your time. I think that's it. So thank you for that. So last orders of business, we talked about the scorecard already. So whatever you do in your scorecard or your signing of your timesheet, if you could just put it back into the binder, and then we're going to give it to Ingrid, our folder, not binder, folder. And thank you for joining this meeting. Our next commission meeting is scheduled for June 26th through the 28th in Bend, Oregon. And we're going to like to thank the commissioners, the community members, all those that testified, the staff, and our hosts, being the City of Lebanon. The meeting is now adjourned.